please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Let's begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have an approval of the agenda for tonight?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Let's see here. We have public comments. So far, I've received 2 public comments. And please, if you have anything to say, please go to the microphone down here on the floor in front of the stage. That way everyone can hear you. The first one is Sybil DeMoro.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Sybil DeMoro. I'm an Ojai resident, a small business owner here in town, and a mother of two children. My husband and I moved here to Ojai in 2007, about 9 years ago, to raise our family. Part of the lure of the valley was not only of the quality of education that we would be able to provide our children, both public and private school options, but the choice of a variety of school settings and school sizes. The needs and the personality of our daughter at that age, she was only 9 months old, was not known to us at that point. But it was very important for us as a family, as a couple, to know that we would have options for our children to choose a school that would be a good fit. We now have 2 children, a 5th grader and a kindergartner, who seem to thrive in a smaller setting, where there's a close relationship of among teachers, staff, students, and families. Over the past 5 years, we've encountered and been embraced by an amazing and diverse community at our school, San Antonio Elementary. Although it's not considered a neighborhood school, there's a vibrant campus life and a community of families that have chosen to take advantage of the small school culture, which fosters this strong student-school bond. There's a stellar lineup of teachers who are beautifully serving combination mixed grade level classes when necessary. This year it's just in 3 rooms. And the students there continue to display strong academic achievement. I'm sure that the board doesn't want to hear pleas from parents not to close their school simply because they love it. My plea is to only close in San Antonio if it is cost effective, if it is not serving an educational need for Ojai families, and if there really aren't any other alternatives. It is my understanding that it's financially negligible to close San Antonio. It's running well, it has a strong, stable enrollment, and is in really good condition. We even have a large crew of parents and children who could contribute regularly to campus-wide cleanups to contribute to its maintenance. Its solid reputation and size has allowed enrollment to increase. San Antonio is not losing students despite decline in district enrollment. Furthermore, the sizable interdistrict transfers to the school do not cost the district any money. Clearly, there is a reason parents are choosing to transfer intradistrictly to San Antonio. Having a small school option here in the Valley is very important to me and many others. Please consider my request to allow San Antonio to continue to serve its purpose. Choice amongst public schools is one of the strengths of the Ojai Unified School District. I ask, 1, is there a genuine need to close a school? 2, would closing a school be done to improve the educational experience of the students or to give teachers a raise? Actually, mostly, I just want to know if there are any other alternatives we can consider. Instead of a school closure, perhaps we can consider a revenue-generating parcel tax as was suggested last meeting. I'm not sure what the answer is, but please consider my request. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Lily Hancock.
name is Lily.
Charlie, you can pull it down.
Pull it down. There you go.
Hi, my name is Lily Hancock. I go to San Antonio, and I love my school so much. It is perfect for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Sandra Hansen.
That was pretty quick. Well, first of all, let me thank you for all the hard work that you do. I would never in my life want to make all these decisions that you make about all of these important items. And I just wanted to thank Andy Cantwell for the revision of the budget today. It looks like there's an excess of money that I hope you consider thinking of the teachers as you look at that excess money. As you know, we've been waiting for a raise for a long, long time. And I see there's things that we're planning on purchasing. And rather than thinking of those kinds of things, I want you to remember the teachers first, because you wouldn't be here without us. I mean, we are what you do. And so if there is any extra money anywhere, and it's not really extra, it's money that needs to go to us. So anything that's coming up in the budget, please remember we're all here and we all need it. So thank you. Just consider that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Are there any other public comments at this time?
Hello, board members and Dr. Bangzer and Kathy Smith and fellow members who I've worked to help you get elected and been involved in the community. I've got friends and family, and it's nice to be in this room and have a chance to come up and speak to you. I know you're grappling with many difficult decisions, and I think you're on the right path. I just want to give you that confidence. It's not easy. What you're doing is not easy. But being somebody who has worked in budgeting and understanding capital improvements, I worked for the state of Oregon, for the Department of where we issued bonds, and we issued bonds to finance improvements. And when you have bond obligations and debts, you need to spend that money wisely, and knowing where you're going to make those improvements have to be for the long term. You have to invest that money wisely. So I understand you're grappling with some huge decisions. I'm also here as somebody who is a proponent of eco schools or green schools, or the education of our children and our families through developing a consciousness about our water situation, our watershed, the things that we can do as parents to get involved with our kids and promote a better understanding of science and curriculum. I was just at a meeting last week with the person who's the head of curriculum for Ventura schools, and he was asking for money to get a curriculum book. It's called Project WET, for all the teachers in Ventura County, for all the Ventura County schools. I took the Project WET training class because I'm a watershed person. It's a great curriculum. I think all of our teachers need this curriculum. He was asking for $4,000. And I've mentioned to Casitas Water District, why don't we get you, Casitas Water District, putting in the hands of all the teachers Project WET curriculum. So I know there are ways to network as a community, to work together to create an environmental awareness and consciousness, especially with this drought. I think our kids and our parents are all concerned, and we all need to be doing more. And I think there are schools that can be revitalized around a new theme that would be capturing and storing rainwater like you're doing at Miners Oaks Elementary School. I'm working with the county, and I'm wanting to see the Miners Oaks Elementary School be not only a neighborhood school, an eco school, a place where kids can walk and have safe routes to school. To me, it's the stellar school in the community. I'm also working with the City of Ojai on the Complete Streets Committee. So I'm looking at all of these things for our school, for our community, and I do think we can revitalize some of our schools in these ways.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Bangser has a few things to say.
Sure, just very briefly, I want to be sure that those of you who are here, who were not here last week, the materials that are out front are the same as last week, so I wanted to be sure that you had them if you attended tonight and last week. The agenda, then the board members have all of these same things in your folders. The agenda, outline of the comments that I made at the beginning of the meeting, a history of enrollment over 16 years, a summary of the 7-Eleven committee recommendations on April 13th, intra and inter-district enrollment information, Andy Cantwell's updated elementary school consolidation savings analysis, and those are the things that are available tonight. There also is an agenda for tonight in both English and Spanish. We have additional information that we're looking at tonight. Andy will be reporting on the 2015-16 unaudited actuals. You'll understand what all that is, and then some other information that relates to tonight's meeting. So that's all I wanted to be sure everybody knew was available for your reading and following along in the meeting.
Okay, so we're going to move on to resolution. This is item 4.1.1. This is in recognition of parent-teacher organizations, their membership. This is membership month, and we're honoring those parent-teacher organizations. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to thank the parent-teacher organizations for all of the incredible things that they do for our schools. And we really couldn't, I don't think we could survive. Our students would be, I don't think we could survive without them, and I think our students definitely benefit from the parent-teacher organizations. So did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Well, I have a question for the board. I know this is a template from Sacramento, and I know we all adore our PTO organizations. I have a question, or I have a concern with the fourth paragraph, whereas parent-teacher organizations promote united efforts by educators and the general public that will secure for all children and youth the highest advantages in physical, mental, social, and spiritual education. I'm a little surprised by the spiritual education, and I'm wondering if that bothers anybody else. If we could just strike the word spiritual so that it's physical, mental, and social education.
Would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Well, can we talk about it?
Sure.
I don't equate spiritual, if you think that means religion, at least if it does to you, it doesn't to me. Spiritual to me is a personal sort of relationship to the world. I think everyone has a spiritual side. I don't think fostering a spiritual side in a child is, if your concern is religion.
Yes, it is.
That doesn't resonate with me as a religious reference, personally. So I would vote against it.
Okay.
We don't have a motion yet, so.
Just a
Any
preview.
other concerns?
I also think Ojai is often described as a spiritual community. And I think that's part of what Ojai is.
Yeah, I have to say I didn't automatically jump to religious. I understand the concern. I kind of took this more as like a mindfulness kind of appreciation of where you are, not necessarily affiliated with anything. But I can see where, absent context, it might lend itself to that interpretation.
Right. And I understand it in terms of not being religious. Obviously, we don't have that focus, but I'm fine with leaving it as it is. I just wanted to hear thoughts on it, and I'm fine.
Do I have a motion to approve this?
I'll move to approve it.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. So, item 4.1.2, this is in recognition of September 17th as Constitution Day and Citizenship Day. This is an action item also.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Do we have any discussion about this? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. All right, now we have,
I'm sorry, before we move on, I just do have a question.
okay, maybe your microphone should be closer.
And it's really for Hank. Is there going to be anything at the schools to coincide with this next year? I know I know it's very quick now, but
You know, it's a great question about when we receive these statewide resolutions, and we have to pick and choose a little bit as to which ones we focus on and which ones we don't. I can tell you for sure that we're going to have, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, I'll just say a surprise at the September 20th regular meeting when we will be acknowledging the contributions of the Hispanic community to the United States. So very significant there. We tend to put our energies in the area of ethnicity and race, okay, as opposed to, now you know I'm a lover of the Constitution, taught it, studied it, so if I had my way, we would do a lot of it. And I know for the attorneys on the board, I'm sure you did a lot of studying on your own, as well as the other three of you. The answer is for sure yes in our, but really mostly in our junior high and high school, and not so much in September or September 17th. It's spread out over the course of the year.
All right, so now we're moving on to our business items, 5.1.1. This is an adoption of the actual and estimated GAN limits. And I guess, Andy, you're going to update us on that?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So the first item before we actually go into the unaudited actuals is this GAN limit resolution. Occasionally Sacramento will make requests that make little sense and are a bit tedious. This is one of those things. Since the late 70s, they implemented this GAN limit calculation that must be completed on an annual basis for all school districts. To my knowledge, over the past 36 years, there's never been a district who has violated the GAN limit calculation, and because if you violate it at the local level, you actually are able to look up to now its state calculation. So there's actually never been an instance of where a district does not pass the GAN limit test. However, each year we are required to do that calculation. You'll see the numbers that are associated with the calculation do not match up with the actuals that you're seeing in the next section of the agenda. Because we are looking at only a subsection of revenues and expenditures. But that's the origin of this document, and again, it's going to be separate from the broader unaudited actuals that we're about to look at.
Okay. Any questions for Andy? Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the resolution.
second.
Kevin seconding?
Michael.
Mike, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. All right. So now we move on to item 5.1.2. This is revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance for the general fund. Okay, this is Andy again.
Sure. So because I know we have some in the audience who aren't always here during our regular meetings where we review the budget, just to give an overview of what this is relative to the other times throughout the year that we look at the budget. Budget is approved during the June board meeting for the upcoming fiscal year, which runs from July 1 through June 30, coinciding with the school year as well. Throughout the year, we make interim revisions to the budget. So Laura and her team are looking at the budget on a weekly basis, looking at expenditures, tracking, making sure everything's in line. Typically twice a year we make these interim revisions. This past year we actually did a third interim revision to ensure as best accuracy as we could as we were building the 16-17 budget. And then once the fiscal year closes on June 30th, we then spend the summer actually closing out the books, and we present these unaudited actuals to you in September. We refer to them as the unaudited actuals because we actually have our audit firm that will come in at the end of this month and we'll take a look at all the work that's been completed, and we'll verify the accuracy of, or the appropriateness of these numbers. And then in either December or January is when we actually have the audit report and the audited actuals. It's very rare that our district or any district would actually see a change between this unaudited look and the final look. So this is what we believe to be the final look for the 15-16 fiscal year. And as was mentioned earlier, we do have some positive news. If you jump to page 4 of 4, I'm going to just go right to the back, and then we'll work our way forward from there. Page 4 of 4 shows what our ending fund balance is as of close of books for 15-16. If you look at about halfway down page 4, projected ending fund balance, just to make sure that for those in the audience and board members that understand the columns we're looking at. The first set of numbers, so the first 3 columns of numbers on the page are for our revision 3. So again, this was the third interim revision that we brought to you back in May, June timeframe, looking at expenditures really through March and early April. And then the next column and set of 3 numbers is the actuals that we're looking at today. And then the last grouping of 3 numbers, 3 columns, is the difference between those 2 numbers. So looking at the difference between our third interim revision and then our actuals. So now jumping to the midway point on page 4 of the data, you see projected ending fund balance is going up to just over $2.1 million. If you jump over to that column with that third grouping of numbers, you'll see that's a $482,000 increase from what we were projecting at the third interim revision. So now if you make our way down, we can see what makes up that $2.1 million reserve or ending fund balance. There's a few small figures that you see the revolving cash and stores that we have in our warehouse. But then the significant numbers are the state required reserve for economic uncertainties. That's what is mandated to be at minimum 3%. If you recall, that was the number that as recent as this past fiscal year, we began in 15-16 only a 2.25% reserve based on county recommendation or mandate. We increased it up to 3% during the 15-16 fiscal year, and we're maintaining that 3% reserve. So that's the $750,000 that really we do not have the ability to tap into. Below that, you will see a few items that are other set-asides of this $2.1 million ending fund balance. As again was mentioned earlier, there is one item here that is a reserve for a purchase of a wheelchair van, which will actually be discussed in a later item in the agenda. So I won't go too much into detail at this time, but you will see that what we did was actually set aside a portion of the ending fund balance from 15-16 for this purchase. The reason for that is the revenue that was we generated from selling 2 of our buses in 15-16, which we'd like to use for this purpose. We wanted to maintain, again, 15-16, the revenues came in, and so the set aside from the 15-16 budget for this purpose. The other items that you see as reserve, the reserve for Saturday school, reserve for site or department carryover, and then the reserve for donation accounts, those are just simply carrying forward unspent amounts from donations that our PTOs and PTOs or OEF might be bringing into the district, or Saturday school. When we do have a Saturday school, the revenue that comes in for that goes directly back to the school site that offered the program, and so that's why you'll see these particular set-asides. So now the, again, most significant number that we're looking at is actually the unappropriated amount, which is the last line of numbers. You'll see that number to be $1.16 million, just under 1.2. Again, a $300,000 increase from what we were projecting at third interim. So that's the finish line. That's where we ended up. I can go through a few of the revenues and the significant changes to revenue, significant changes to expenditures to help you understand what led to that variance. But I also can open up at this time if there are specific questions.
I'm just so happy I can hardly stand it. Anybody have any questions for Andy about the budget?
Well, I mean, without getting into line specific,
Sure.
do you have a general sense of, this happened and therefore the extra funding?
So the additional funding, we have a few primary places that came from a revenue standpoint. If you go back to page 2 of 4, we can look at the various sources of revenue. You'll see the first grouping of revenue sources are all LCFF, which is far and away the largest portion of our funding. And there was very little change, only $6,000 change there. You'll see in the second grouping of funding that we had, again, very little change relative to having a total of $1.2 million coming in revenue, the change of $60,000. The reason for that change is that Title I, we're not able to realize the revenue in a year in which the expenditures are not also expended. And so we had a carry forward that's going to be shown in the 16-17 first interim revision. So that's the reason for the change with Title I. So again, really no relevant changes in LCFF revenue, no relevant changes in federal funding. The significant change on the other state sources category is our Career Pathways grant. You'll see that we had $388,000 for Career Pathways at third interim. We did not lose that funding. It, again, simply was not expended in 15-16. We have multiple years to spend these funds, and so we roll that forward into the 16-17 year. So the revenue is going to actually be realized in the year in which there's expenditures to offset that revenue. So there's not actual a change, even though it looks like we lost $220,000 in revenue. It's simply going to be realized in 16-17. So the real changes came in that local sources category. And the primary reasons for that are, first, as you'll see, that $45,000 from sale of equipment. That was the sale of our 2 buses. Next time down, you'll see that we did a full reconciliation of the lease and rents for our facilities, which includes the skate park, includes the CDR buildings at 3 of our elementary schools, 4 portable units across 3 elementary schools. And then it also includes any time we actually have facility rentals when Ojai Eagles are using our football field, or when there are groups using this auditorium.
Andy, could you break it down then? What does that mean? Why did we get more revenue from reconciliation?
It was not a matter of getting more revenue. It was actually, we had not been making the full adjustment and projecting out throughout the year. What we had in the third interim revision was the same numbers that had been present at first and second interim, and that was really ensuring that we were accounting for the skate park revenue and CDR revenue, the actual facility rentals, again, associated with things like the youth sports or other organizations that rent these auditoriums or other sites were not updated in the budget until this time.
And I think that you might have expressed this concern as well, but I just want to vocalize it again, that making sure that these numbers are accounted for as soon as possible is really helpful, because often it looks like there are these surprises that really aren't surprises, but it kind of looks like we're caught off guard.
Right, I agree with you, and as I've been stating for the past year, I would certainly have liked these sorts of things not to have occurred at this time. I think it's legitimate when we're looking at a $26 million budget, as we do have so many of these changes that we're implementing to our budgeting process that we're still in the process of implementing the change. But I am confident that you will not see that in 16-17. Absolutely. So if we make our way down, the biggest category that you're going to see the change to is the donation account. And that's something that we were making, again, significant strides in improving the timing that we were showing or projecting the revenue in the fiscal year, but we still just had incredible support from the community, both in what we'd call true donations that you typically think of, as well as some of the donations that are either associated with some of the after-school programs, or potentially the programs that we had throughout the year, like at Topa Topa, where we were allowing parents to purchase Chromebooks for their students through the district. And so we're still classifying those as donations, even though, again, it was actually a benefit directly to the individual family and child.
So those are round trips, basically, right?
Correct.
You take you account for the money as a donation, but then it goes out as a payment for the Chromebook. The kid gets the Chromebook. The parents effectively paid for the Chromebook, with the district being in the middle. That's
exactly correct. Right.
How do we go about buying a bus? What's the process? How do we make sure we're getting a good price?
So a bus, or the van that we're looking at right now? So a van, we ended up going out to multiple vendors, went to both Enterprise as the primary fleet company that the districts use around here, looking at potential lease option through them, as well as went to, I believe Cindy, our transportation supervisor, went to 3 separate vendors for actual purchase of a van. Looked at leasing options and realized that, again, because we had the finances at this time, that the actual lease cost, the financing charges associated with that, were not going to benefit the district rather than just purchasing outright.
Have we ever done a study of buses or other transportation with respect to whether we've leased or bought it outright, and seen how it played out, to the end when we've sold it or otherwise disposed of the bus at the end of the useful cycle? In other words, have we compared the two ways of acquiring transportation, that is leasing versus outright buying and seeing how it played out?
So our historical practice would either be financing or an outright purchase. I actually am not familiar with the instance where we did lease. What we've typically looked at is either a 5 or 7 year finance, or it's a lease with a purchase option with the known end outcome being an actual purchase of the vehicle at the end of the term. So no, we have not done a analysis for our own district on prior leasing.
It's my understanding that leasing tends to be at the advantage if you're keeping the vehicle shorter term. And obviously,
Right,
we
and-
know
and
we
our-
have.
It doesn't apply to us.
Right, our
Right.
vehicles, when we were looking at the lease rates, we were looking at a minimum of 20,000 mile per year allowance. And our vans typically are driving between 20 and 30,000 miles per year. So again, when you look at a 5-year lease potentially, the residual value on the vehicle at the end of that term is only $1,000 or $2,000, which, like I said, it's really just another form of a financed option. So our buses currently, the bus fleet we have average at least 20 years in age and 350 to 400,000 miles. Our vans have between 150 to 250,000 miles.
I think it's worth noting too, a lot of times companies benefit a lot from a lease because of tax advantages, which we don't really have.
Correct, that's correct.
I have one more on the comparison of where we've ended up in the actuals with respect to the coming year and our budget. It looks like there's a pretty substantial drop that you're expecting in a certain category of state funding, right? In fact, our last year's total revenues are expected to be greater than this coming year's total revenues, right?
That's correct. So one of the primary, actually, if you want to jump to going back to page 2 of 2, if you look at in the third grouping of funds, the mandated cost, the very first item identified, we had $1.4 million in revenue in 15-16. In 16-17, the budgeted amount is less than half of that. And going out into the out years, we are budgeting less than 10% of that amount. So what this funding source is, it's the governor making a one-time commitment, although he's done it now for 3 years where it's been of substance, where he's using it as both one-time funding to defer the Prop 98 guarantee, so it's delaying by at least a year or two the increase in ongoing funding that schools will receive. And he's also using it as a way to purchase down the outstanding mandated cost claims. So anytime the state is requiring us to do something more, they're supposed to be funding that something more. We all know that the state's not funding that and hasn't for decades. And so for a long period of time, we were actually submitting these called mandate cost claims to the state. They were going unfunded, and then finally, just a couple of years ago, the governor said, hey, I'm going to give the districts one-time funding, and I'm going to kind of double dip because I'm going to say that regardless of if you've submitted claims in the past or not, I'm going to have this buy down any outstanding claim that may exist by a district. And so this one-time funding source, we do not anticipate extending beyond the 16 to 17 fiscal year.
And isn't this the category in which you're saying some districts actually chose to litigate?
That's correct.
And the ones who are litigating potentially could get receive some upside still? Or did they all just agree to the governor's proposal? Do you know?
I don't know.
Any other questions for Andy?
Yeah, since we started on the bus thing, I just had one other question on that. So we sold two van. I'm sorry.
Sold 2 buses.
I need to learn from others' mistakes. So we sold 2 vehicles, correct? And then it's proposed that we buy one.
Correct.
What are we currently doing to transport the individuals?
Right, so we do have one wheelchair accessible bus. That was the bus that we have recently purchased just the past few years. However, we have a number of students with IEPs who leave the district and go down to Ventura or to other regional programs, special education programs, or private school programs. What we're currently doing for the children that require wheelchair accessibility is implementing a team lift with both a van driver and potentially a one-on-one instructional assistant who's driving with the students to actually lift the child into the van, lift the child out. We currently have a population that is a population with these needs that are continuing through the district, and as they grow older, they're also gaining weight. And so they are at this point really getting near the limits of where a team lift approach would be the appropriate method for both the safety of the staff as well as the safety of the child. This really is something the district needs. Our other option at this point, if we don't go forward with the purchase of this van, would be potentially looking at outsourcing using a third party like Student Transportation of America or Durham to provide the service. Their cost in a single year is about the same cost of the vehicle. So it's extremely expensive when you do outsource, but that is an option.
Great, thank you.
One additional question, just as long as we're on the topic. Have
Sure.
we looked at alternative fuel vehicles, or are we looking at standard vans?
So for vans, we've only been looking at standard. The 2 buses that we sold this past year were CNG. We've had significant difficulty with CNG, and in fact, a number of the neighboring districts as well have really been moving away from that fleet. If we'd maintained our 2 CNG buses, there was the need to do, I'm sure you recall, $20,000 to each of the buses to replace the tanks that were on those because they were exceeding their, usable life. CNG has a shorter life on those tanks. And then the actual fuel station that we have was also going to require about $50,000 upgrade or a change to the fuel station. So right now, the districts and even the private schools here in town that use CNG, to my knowledge, typically have to go down to Oxnard to the CNG fill station down there. Wow. And so it becomes quite costly both in staff time and miles on vehicles to have them leave the valley to simply fuel up.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Andy?
So last thing I wanted to say on as we discuss this is good news I think tonight that that we're sharing, that we have this increase in funding for 15-16. Kevin, I think you brought up a very important point about what we do see in these upcoming years. I just do want to always bring it back to that discussion because these years are going to be coming. There's no question that the surpluses that we've seen in 15-16, we're budgeting in 16-17. There's a high likelihood that we are going to see the surplus eliminated. Right now, we're budgeting deficits in the 2 following years. And we did actually receive a letter from our county superintendent, who's charged with being responsible for fiscal oversight of districts, over the summer, warning us of their concern about our current projection for deficit spending in those 2 out years. I did receive some positive news today that if Prop 55 passes, that would go a significant way toward helping offset the deficits 2 years out in 18-19. But at this time, the county superintendent again does have concern over our current plans of significant deficit spending in 17-18, 18-19. And the increase in our ending fund balance does not negate or reduce the likelihood of the deficit spending. Again, remember, deficit spending is looking at in a single year whether or not revenues exceed expenditures. Our ending fund balance, the fact that it's grown, is going to allow us to go a longer period of time, the deficit spending of where we are having expenditures exceed our revenues.
Okay. Do we have a
I
motion?
just want to repeat that Prop 55, we want to vote yes on.
We'll have an agenda item for you.
I finished the resolution a half hour ago, and it will come to you next week.
Tuesday night, we'll have a resolution. Hopefully, everybody can embrace it to support Prop 55.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve the unaudited actuals?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. Anybody who wants to do some really exciting reading, this is the unaudited actuals here. You're welcome to borrow it from me. It's really fun, but anyway. Okay.
We have copies at the district office as well if anyone would like to
Okay.
keep a copy.
Now we're moving on to 5.1.3, Capital Facilities Fund, their annual financial report. This is for information.
So this is the funding source that we receive from developer fees. So just as a reminder, as it states on your information on page 2 of this item, the current cost for developer fees is $3.20 for residential development. That's $3.20 per square foot. If the extension of a property or the new habitable space exceeds 500 square feet is when this amount is charged. There's significant restrictions on the use of these funds. It cannot be for simple routine maintenance, can't be for deferred maintenance. It must be for an actual true replacement of an item or a true upgrade of something related to the facility. So it also can't go toward any staffing, certificate or classified. So what we've really been doing for the past couple years, this has been the trend for 3 or 4 years, I think, in large part wanting to make sure that we really had these funds appropriately, tie in with Measure J, making sure that we leveraged each of these funding sources to the best way we can. You'll see that we did bring in revenue in excess of expenditures and that we are increasing our ending fund balance. So at the end of the 15-16 school year, you'll see that we've increased our ending fund balance to $817,000, up from $650,000 from the prior year.
Question? The 3 expenses, Chaparral, Matilla, Topo Topo, how was it determined to spend this money there?
So these were actually based on urgent needs that we had, that we weren't able to have more, proactive, longer-term strategic thinking on. We had a HVAC system that went out that required replacement, and because this is a permissible use of funding, we'd rather use this when it was a required replacement rather than the less restrictive general fund, because that is something that can go toward staff salaries, toward higher staffing levels, or other, again, unrestricted purposes.
So it was based on immediate needs?
It's based on immediate need, correct.
Thank you.
Andy, who's making the judgment as to whether or not a particular need can be funded through that money?
Primarily me, with advice and guidance from Laura, as well as from the appropriate staff in the maintenance and operations department. So when Josh was here, Josh was also providing feedback, and then now Russ or Craig.
Any other questions about this item? All right.
I'll move to approve.
Well, it's an information item.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
I thought we had to approve it.
Now we're moving on to the wheelchair accessible van, and this is an information item also. We talked about that, I guess. Anybody else have any other questions about the van? So when,
So the reason that we're bringing this to you now is it is actually exciting. Typically, these have at least a 3-month lead time, because once you purchase, they actually, once you enter into an agreement with one of these organizations, they then actually go out and purchase the van, and then there's the requirement to then make it the wheelchair accessible. So you'll see the actual breakdown, the invoice, that the cost of the vehicle is separate from the cost of the improvements. We happen to actually have this company notified us that they do have a vehicle that's available immediately. They've been extremely patient with us for the past 2 weeks or so, because there have been a few other claims from other districts requesting the vehicle. And so if this is, if I have the feedback from you, although it's not an item that you must approve, I just wanted to bring it to you. If I do get the go-ahead from you tonight, then tomorrow morning we're going to be calling the vendor, and hopefully we'll have the van on site within a week.
okay, well, on the agenda it says it's an information item.
Correct,
Okay,
exactly.
all right,
I just want, because this is a larger expense item,
Right.
and it is one that is discretionary in the sense that there are other paths that we could take. Again, I believe this is the right path, but there are other options that could potentially be pursued, and so I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this before we acted on it.
Under the invoice, it says accessories are $19,300. That's the wheelchair?
Exactly, so
Oh,
that's
wow.
the modifications that are made to the
That's-
vehicle. So
wow.
if you look at some of the materials that are on the pages following the invoice, you'll see, get a little bit of a sense of the actual lift that's put into the vehicle, and then the way in which they actually rearrange the seating so they can properly secure the wheelchair to the vehicle itself. So that's the reason for the significant increase in cost.
And Andy, I know it's an information item. From my perspective, I think any expenses like this, we should spend in the district extra time on being so-called smart shoppers. I mean, I think that I have seen enough to know that there are certain sort of avenues that sometimes schools use reflexively to buy things that aren't necessarily the best way or cheapest way to do it. And sometimes you can do it, sometimes same product, cheaper elsewhere, fine. I think this is one of those situations where you clearly want it to be done right. You don't want to fool around with a wheelchair van, from Ted and, Rancho Cucamonga. No offense, any Teds out there.
Or Rancho
but
Cucamonga.
I'm okay with the Rancho. But I appreciate you bringing it to us, and I think it is reflective of the current mood, and well done. I mean, that's all I want to say.
Okay. All right, so moving on to item 6.1.1. This is an initial discussion about the analysis of the district budget. This is information, and Member Ruff and Mr. Cantwell and possibly Member Weil will talk about their conversation over the budget.
So, at our last meeting, I made it clear, and again, I recognize I only represent my own thinking, and I'm not even suggesting my thinking is right, but it is how I think about potentially closing a school. To me, I believe the justification would have to be financial. And I also believe that pretty consistently, looking around at other districts that have closed schools, the justification has been financial. So on that basis, and agreeing with many people who've spoken to us about this, even beginning with the 7-Eleven committee and the people who spoke to the 7-Eleven committee, I agree completely that closing a school should be a last resort with respect to the financial savings and with respect to the financial condition of the district, that we should look for potentially other ways of saving money or finding resources, both on the bringing in revenue side and, of course, saving money on the expense side. So, we have heard from a lot of people in the community about potential ways of bringing more people into our district, and it's not pie in the sky. Oak Park brings a lot of people into their district because of the quality of the school. So with that as a prelude, I and Jane met with Andy. One of the things I've wanted to do is potentially bring in a broader kind of, as I like to say, that kind of free-flowing discussion of the budget, where everyone sits around a table and asks any questions. Very difficult on Andy, but eye-opening maybe. But I think we're not right there yet. So what we wanted to do is sort of talk about aspects of the budget where there might be some room to find savings, and talked about other things like metrics. We talked about metrics, that is, relationships of numbers. Things like, what if we look at the Ojai School District in terms of how much money we spend on our certificated staff, that being teachers, and compare that to our total revenue? How do we do compared to other districts? How do we do in Ojai with respect to the ratio of classified staff to certificated staff? How do we do in terms of administrative expenses relative to total revenues? Things like that. And so we're kind of at the beginning of that conversation, but Andy, he knows his stuff, and I'll tell you, one big question that I had was with respect to the amount of classified staff we seem to have relative to our certificated staff. And Andy pointed out that one of the ways the district has actually conserved resources, particularly in the area of special education, has been that we have a number of people providing great services in special education who are classified as classified and classified together, but you know what I meant. So we're still talking about this stuff, and I'll kind of turn it over to Jane, but I'm continuing to ask questions, and I still would advocate. I would like to have an evening where the community comes and we talk about how we spend money in our district. As broad as that.
I agree. I think the specific questions you did ask and that Andy answered didn't find any, wow, there it is. And I think when the public is maybe dropping in for a meeting or hearing something and then not attending the next session. Sometimes you lose the sort of answers kind of drop through, so that there's these questions that make it look as if there's possibilities out there that we're ignoring. And I think that conversation kind of helps everyone look at the information you have on hand or in your head, and that we're getting in these larger packets and dissecting them a little bit to sort of, for me, it eases my concerns in terms of, are we spending too much here, or are we not looking at other things? But the idea of a lot of people being in a room means you get more ideas, and that's important.
Andy, is there anything you wanted to add about your conversation? These guys.
No, I think it was a great conversation. I agree. I think it was only the first of what will be many. It is something that's, it's challenging. We have had strong leadership over the past 10 years make a number of really challenging decisions. And so I think that one of the things that we're going to see quickly is that there is not some, as Jane said, low-hanging fruit that just has been missed all these years. But I think that there are, still opportunities, and we can really dive into a better understanding for both the board and the public, so we can have those really challenging discussions around how do we prioritize a number of competing needs when we have a small overall pie to allocate from.
That said, though, and as Jane mentioned at our last meeting on the subject of the schools, smaller numbers do add up. It does make a difference. We've all been there where we've been, using a calculator and adding what seems to be small numbers, and then at the end of it, you go, "Wow, I didn't think it was going to be that much." So, there's certainly room to continue to talk about things we can do in our district, creative ways of saving money. I did encounter in my recent research up in Plumas County, of all places, because there was also issues about closing schools up there. They formed an austerity committee that included people from the community, business people, accountants, others, and they collectively worked on ideas for how the district could save money, which seems like maybe that would be a good idea, regardless of how things play out.
Absolutely.
Just so you know, when Tim Baird was superintendent and when I was first elected to the board, we did have community meetings, as you're speaking about, and we had a group that formed to figure out ways of saving money. I think I might still have that list, actually, from way back in 2005 or something like that. But it was a very interesting conversation, and I think that we've actually implemented quite a few of their suggestions. But Amy Mendoza would like to speak or ask a question about LCFF this year. So Amy, you want to come to the microphone, since we're talking about money at this point? Mm-hmm.
It's on.
Thank you for taking my question, because I know it was very informal. But Andy, I had spoken with you, and I know this is possibly grasping at straws, and it would be the beautiful answer to all of our problems in the room, if, because of our LCFF, that is where all our main monies come from. And I know there was a big push, I believe, at most of the schools this year. We haven't had our open house yet, our back to school night, sorry, wrong wording, our back to school night, and the teachers have really made a commitment. I know Danon said when she went to Nordhoff, people were saying, "Have you filled out this form? Have you filled out this form?" And there was a push. And I have made a commitment, and I know it hasn't come from you, because that's not where it comes from. It's to speak with my parents and possibly speak in Spanish and say the importance of filling out the free lunch form. Have we seen anything yet, or were we inundated with the paperwork yet? Has there been any type of increase in those forms coming back? And once again, I know that's the perfect dream answer, but have you seen anything yet in that?
So Suzanne and I actually were reviewing the numbers yesterday.
Okay.
September is a really challenging month. Things are a little wonky because people are able to still be held over from the year prior.
Okay.
Because actually it's on October 1 is when we tell families that at that time is when it's actually October 5th, but October 1 is what we let people know when they need to submit the form so they can be re-upped for the next year. So in September, there's a number of people who we are seeing, again, inflated numbers because they were simply ones that had completed the form last year and haven't yet this year. We have about 238, I believe is the number we said, of people who were on free and reduced last year that have not completed it this year.
That many that haven't, wow.
That many who haven't completed it yet. So
we have our work to do at our sites, maybe, that the teachers and principals really need to get the
Suzanne's going to
name.
be sending out letters to families
Okay.
this week. She's going to be notifying principals, making sure that school sites are aware of who the families are.
That's a
We're
lot.
talking about doing a Blackboard Connect call as well, or a
Okay.
a robocall system. So yeah, we definitely want to continue with the outreach. Right now, though, as we do look at the numbers, we do see them slightly higher than what they were last September. So I don't know what that trend's going to look like after
Right.
October, but as of right now, it's a positive sign.
Slightly higher. We need a lot higher, but okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point, though. With LCFF, it's roughly $1,400 per student who identifies under, and just so everyone in the audience knows, Governor Brown in 2012 implemented LCFF with a priority having additional funding going to students that have the greatest needs. The way he identifies students with the greatest needs, and therefore the way the statute does, is if you are low income as identified by free and reduced meal applications, and if you're an English learner, homeless, or a foster youth. So those are the categories where if you meet any one of those categories, you bring in, again, at this point, it's about $1,400. If we can get ourselves over a 55% threshold of students being identified with one of those categories, it ends up being about $3,500 to $4,000 additional revenue that each child will bring into the district.
Per student.
Per student. So
Per student.
it's a very, very significant, and that's been, I'm glad that you brought
And
when we
that's
were doing it
why
Nordoff. That's been
Santa Paula has so much money in other
That's
neighboring
correct.
communities.
So we certainly have increased though our presence at the back to schools, making sure that we do have both Suzanne or someone from the nutrition department where we can.
Handing them out, and maybe someone
having
speaking
it
Spanish.
as well as,
Oh,
yeah.
perfect. Thank you.
We've had Spanish speaking as well.
Okay, thank you.
But that 55 number, I mean, we were at 40 last year, right?
we're-
It's not like
our-
we're close.
We're around 43% right now, so right, we are a good distance from 55.
43 to 55, we can do this, math.
We can do it.
Across the district.
Across the district, okay.
Right, it varies greatly by school site, certainly.
Okay, Dr. Bangser's going to say a few words, and then I'm going to call on, I'm sorry if I mispronounce, is it Kava Hooper? Kara, okay. Okay, oh, she can go first? All right, Kara, why don't you come up? And sorry, I'm bad at reading handwriting. All right.
Hello, my name is Kara Hooper, and I'm a parent of 2 students at San Antonio. Woo. I'm a resident of the East End, and San Antonio is our neighborhood school. I first want to thank the school board for taking the time to carefully consider the future of our schools in the Ojai Valley. For anyone who's followed this closely, it's clear that you sit at the nexus of a variety of concerns, including the health of teacher salaries, care for our facilities, and the overall educational experience of our children. I appreciate that you are giving so much time to examine every aspect of these issues, and I look forward to hearing the other creative ideas beyond closing a school that you are thinking about. I wanted to take a moment to share 2 things with you on the heels of last week's meeting. San Antonio is proud to be celebrating its 130th year of operation in this valley. We are currently full, and our enrollment has been increasing in the last few years as we've added teachers to meet that growth. Last week, in trying to explain how we put together a number to capture the potential loss of students and thus dollars from our district on the elementary school consolidation savings chart, Mr. Cantwell qualified the number for San Antonio. He noted that he had used interdistrict transfer information to try and arrive at a number, and he said that the number for San Antonio might be low on that chart, as many families have mentioned that they would explore private school options if they left the district during various public comment portions of various meetings over the last several months. I wanted to thank Mr. Cantwell for noting this, as we can already name 3 families and 5 students that have left San Antonio and the district and chosen private school options as a direct result of the hovering cloud of school closure that we have been living under for 18 months. So the concern is already a reality for us at our school. Second, as someone who canvassed neighborhoods on behalf of Measure J in October 2014, I was disappointed to see Measure J savings as a possible consideration on that same elementary school consolidation savings chart. I sat in PTO meetings that fall when we were encouraged to get out the word for Measure J, and we were told that there was no threat of school closure at that time. I'm sure it is easy to say now that no promises were made on that front. As Ms. Taylor pointed out last week, Ojai failed to pass a parcel tax twice, losing the second time by just 71 votes. Heartbreaking. In some sense, Measure J was our community's attempt to make up some ground for our schools. To now use that measure as a rationale or a plus for closing a school makes it very hard to imagine how our district would get anything passed in the future. This would sting for some time. Are there ways to shake it up in our district? Yes. With our small town, we have great opportunities for collaboration between schools. We could each work towards having a program specialty. We could think about language instruction in our schools and how that program culminates in our high school. But closing a school, any school, when we are not in a crisis and have not fully exhausted every other option seems counterintuitive. We have a job in this valley to take care of our youngest and most vulnerable. Why wouldn't we? Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing the rest of your thoughtful discussion.
Thank you. Hey, Dr. Bangser has some words for us.
Just very quickly to, again, as I did at the beginning of the meeting on September 7th, just put some context and calendar a little bit to what we're going to be doing both tonight and to some extent after tonight, although as you'll hear as the meeting unfolds tonight, there are many options the board has available to it in terms of scheduling follow-up conversations after they deliberate tonight. One of the pages I did not mention purposely at the beginning of tonight's meeting that was available are the list, the questions that were not attended to in the September 7th meeting. That is, questions 1 through 9 were discussed, questions 10 through 18 were not. The hour got very late, and it was, I think, correctly decided to move on to tonight. But as you look at those questions, you can probably conclude yourself the 10 through 18 are really quite different as a group than 1 through 9. 1 through 9, as you either heard when you were here, and a number of people here tonight were here last week, some of you were not, but 1 through 9, I think, clearly elicited logical conversation, difference of opinions, conversation between and among board members, and that's what took some time. Tonight, the questions 10 through 18 are different. Some of them are strictly factual, some of them are legal in nature, and we have an opinion that I, as you would expect, would have derived from a conversation with attorneys. Some of them have already been presented in the chart, which Kara just referred to, and Andy did. So I think there is reason to believe that you should not be expecting as long a conversation on 10 through 18 as 1 through 9. And I've given the board some thoughts, and on your yellow sheet here for the board members, I gave them some thoughts over the last day or so about how we could potentially process a number of these questions. And as I said to Linda and the board, I'm happy to participate in facilitating that movement through 18, because clearly, as Linda will explain when that conversation is done, the main focus tonight, and I shared this in an email with principals within the last day, the main focus of tonight is to take the 6 options that were delineated in the comments that I made at the outset of the September 7th meeting that are on the pages that you have, that you picked up tonight. There are 6 options there, and as Jane moved to get us to think about a week ago, to put a priority on discussing those and deciding which among those have enough support at this table to move forward or not move forward in the conversation. The last thing I would say is that, as I said to the board in one sentence, the calendar that we set up from September 7th through October 17th, October 17th being the deadline the board established back a number of months ago for making this decision, the options are pretty dizzying. Depending on what we do tonight, that would then dictate what we might do next Tuesday night at the regular meeting, in this auditorium and/or next Tuesday night and possibly Wednesday night in the next special meeting, and then what happens then would dictate what would happen after that in one or more public hearings in between the board making a decision on the option that would be, the definition is their tentative position, which is then the subject of the public meeting, public hearing. And following the public hearing, the board then would make a decision on October 17th. So there are lots of options, and that was really what I was referring to as the calendar can be a bit dizzying. But we've certainly processed a lot of information quickly in the first part of this meeting, a lot of which is just sort of normal board business. And that was the introduction I wanted to share as you move into the last questions that were presented a week ago.
I have some thoughts also. As you guys know, this is very hard for us, really, really hard. We know that you don't want us to close the school, I'm sorry. We don't want to close the school. We don't think that's something that any school board should ever have to make the decision about. We have so carefully analyzed all the public comment, all the findings of the 7-Eleven committee, as well as all of our enrollment and funding issues, which are huge. All of our elementary schools are doing a fantastic job. Our teachers are amazing. Our administrators, the principals, the staff at each school just does an absolutely outstanding job, and our kids benefit because of it, our students benefit. We're not making a choice based on performance. That would never be a reason for us to close a school. Our resources, our students and funding are scarce. And when that happens, it is often necessary to consolidate, which is what we're considering. We're not saying we're going to, it's what we're considering. So we will hold on to campuses, that if we decide to close a school, we'll hold on to those and see if enrollment changes or situation changes, if some movie star decides to give us $10 million endowment or whatever. But we're really so carefully considering this. And we hope that you will be patient with us and understanding of this difficult decision that we have to make. So, moving on. So, you had something you wanted to say, Mike?
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize we were moving the agenda until it was a little bit late. I wanted to tack on to something that Jane and Kevin.
Klaus. This guy over there, yeah.
Yeah, Ted. Was from Rancho Cucamonga, was saying about the budget, right? Because I'm also, and I wholeheartedly endorse the concept of metrics and benchmarking, key metrics and key benchmarks, because I do believe that those give you the framework to start looking at things that you want to do. It's very difficult to sit down with a blank slate and say, here's all the changes that we need to put in place without some frame of reference, and I think the benchmarking does that. Along those lines, we've talked before about focusing on the actual money that's discretionary. And so that, I think, kind of helps to target that conversation. I also hope that in addition to ideas from the parents and the public, that we will hear ideas from staff, because I still want to hear more about process improvements. I think it's all marginal stuff, but every penny counts. So I think there's recoveries there. The other thing that I would like you to consider, and this ties into the conversations of making any kinds of changes, is considering at whatever rudimentary level is feasible, starting to look at multi-year budgets, because it's very hard to project what something is going to have, and most of what we're going to do is going to have a long-term effect. It's not going to be a short-term, fortune. It's very hard to feel that or see that without looking farther into the future. I do not expect this for multi-years, because it seems to me there's no point in looking at the stuff that we have no control over. But I would like to have a larger context than the single fiscal year.
Are you saying also beyond the 3 years that we use in the multi-year, so something like a 5-year or 10-year window?
Getting less and less detailed as we go out, but just a sense of what is the long-term impact going to be, because it's very hard to get a feel for that.
Andy, maybe you can just take a minute and explain when you and Laura look out at the next year, So let's say it's the spring of 2016. We're looking at the 2016-17 budget, and then, of course, the state requires, I think appropriately, looking at 17-18 and 18-19. And then, as Sandra pointed out, and has been pointed out other times, those projections can be, sort of negative, right, given our declining enrollment and other situations, getting quite close to our LCFF limit. But just picking up on what Mike said, what are the metrics, what are the characteristics that you build into the expenditures and revenues of that second and third year? Because we just don't end up with a number in the bottom line. That number's the result of a variety of assumptions, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so maybe just talk about that.
So on the revenue side, when we're building a multi-year projection, again, the biggest funding source we have is LCFF revenue. FCMAT, the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team, which is the statewide watchdog for public education on the financial side. They actually put together a calculator, the FCMAT calculator, that is the tool every district in the state uses to project revenue through LCFF in the out years. So I actually have a calculator that shows me what LCFF revenue is projected to be for the next, Laura, 5 years? So we have a window into looking at a 5-year projection of what LCFF revenue will be. However, you still have to make underlying assumptions. So you have to decide, what do we project enrollment to look like in the year, the coming year, and certainly 5 years out, which for our kindergartners, 5 years out, they're just now being born, this year, this month. So obviously challenges there, but that's what our job is. We're doing an enrollment projection that's going to then drive the revenue side of LCFF. On the non-LCFF revenue sources, we look at either historical trends on if we know about a change to a federal program, we're going to account for that. Otherwise, we'll typically hold the federal revenues equal or even to what they were in prior years, if that's, again, what the historical trend would show. On the that other state resources, that's where we do actually take a more conservative approach, and that's where sometimes you do see changes is once we actually hit that fiscal year. And we talked already today about that mandated claim category. I told you that in the out years we've budgeted a very small amount, and that is the most likely area that you'll see change when we're starting to actually look at the 17-18 fiscal year once the governor comes out with his initial proposal in January. Because that is a one-time funding source, I'm not going to be aggressive and assume that they're going to provide us the same funding as the years prior. And fortunately, we don't do that because, like I said, in 16-17 we lost nearly 60% of that funding. So if we had budgeted in the multi-year, just assuming a hold harmless, we'd be wrong. So we take a little bit more conservative approach in those assumptions, and then on the staffing side or on the expenditure side, we again try to account for any staffing changes that we might know. We do our analysis on what the step and column increases will be in these upcoming years based on the current staffing level we have, because a teacher who's been with us for 20 years is only actually seeing an increase in their salary every few years based on longevity, whereas a brand new teacher is seeing those increases on an annual basis. So we take a full look at our staffing to project out what those step and column will be, based on an understanding also of historical trends on retirement. So we bring all of those pieces together to really build those out years. Curriculum and the non-instructional or non-staffing side of those expenditures, we do the best we can if we know what curriculum or textbooks might be planned for. Otherwise, we typically are going to hold it even with what we see at adopted budget in the current year. So a number of assumptions need to be made. We use the School Services California. We'll provide assistance on what their projections are for COLAs in the out years or potential increases on the STIRS and PERS side. We have seen a lot of increases lately on the school pension. So we're taking the best feedback we can receive from a number of different state organizations as well as private organizations like School Service California that provide us that feedback, and then we're doing our own work to help build that multi-year.
So here's my question.
Sure.
Metrics, as Kevin mentioned, are good. It's also good to track our own metrics, right? So we see progress or lack of. But are there standards, are there benchmarks that we can compare ourselves to so we get a sense of not just how are we in relation to how we used to be, but how are we in relation to similar districts that are high performers?
Absolutely. Actually, I'd encourage everyone in the audience and the board as well, ed-data.org is an incredible website that is administered through the state. It has information on demographics and enrollment trends and patterns of the past few years for each of the school districts in the entire state. And they just recently, about 2 or 3 months ago, put up financial information as well. So you actually can go on to that website. You're able to see not quite to the detail of our 100-page book for each school site, but you certainly can see what percent of expenditures are expended on certificated staff, and that will give you how that percent ranks relative to the statewide average for unified districts, for similarly situated districts as well. So you can get some nice benchmarks there. I've requested, and I actually have a workbook that I've been working off of from receiving information from all the districts in our county to help us be able to create some of those metrics as well.
Okay, good, thank you.
I would like to also add to that, just a couple of people spoke last week, and one of them, I think it was Mary Ann, mentioned, we knew we were in a fiscal crisis in 2008 and 9 and 10. We didn't close a school then. Why would we need to close one now when there's not a fiscal crisis? And then we had William Ulrich speak about the fact that a significant number of our homes are being sold to people who are buying second homes. So they're not bringing their families here for school. They're bringing them here on weekends or vacations, or so we need to look at the trends not only of our district but of our valley, and then look ahead, like Michael was saying, in the long term. So in the long term, as our teachers earn more just by increasing the number of years they're with us, as we see the LCFF funds go down, as there's changes made at the state, that's all in this pot. So I know when you just look at that first number of what at the end of last year, that extra funding, it looks like this is great. Mm-hmm. But we have to look really long term.
All right, so moving on to item 6.1.2, we're going to finish up with the questions. We ended at number 9, and we'll go to all the way to the end of our questions that we didn't discuss last week. And then hopefully we'll be able to come up with 2 potential options that we would then later vote on. 2 things that, and I'm going to read the options now just so you guys have some idea of what. Well, you have them to read. You don't need me to read them to you. But anyway, what will we do? What will we be recommending? What will we be considering? Not that we're voting on them tonight. We're just putting those as our 2 primary options. So hopefully by the end of our discussion tonight, we will be able to choose 2 of the options of what our configuration is going to be. If we're going to reconfigure or if we're going to keep the configuration that we have now. So number 10 is what actually becomes of the closed school property, and is it prudent to close the school when you don't know how the property will be used? So I believe, Andy, you had some comments on what happens to the school property when it's closed.
So the short-term answer is obviously the operational maintenance expenses go down. However, there still would be some need for obviously care for the facility. We know that we have the ability in the short term to be looking at local organizations, both nonprofit and potentially others, renting that facility. Longer term, there is a more advanced process that I think that our attorney next week is going to help really lay out what the steps would be for longer term leases or potential designation of the use of the property. So a little bit more advanced process that will be discussed next week, but there are short-term options on what would happen to the property.
Mm-hmm. Anyone have any comments on that question, number 10?
So this was one of mine, and yeah. So to begin with, it seems to me that, theoretical savings are not, something that we should base a decision on as significant as closing a school. And so specific to the question of what becomes of the property, it's easy for us to sort of stay at 20,000 feet and say, well, it would be, maintained, it could be used for other things. And then once you're there, the lawyer in me says, well, of course, you're going to want to maintain it. To the extent that there are things that Measure J has identified that need to be done, you probably want to do those unless you're actually going to tear it down. And then suddenly, you're in a position where the benefits or the savings don't seem so significant. And as I have said before, it just seems apropos of everyone's seeming agreement that we need to plan for the future. Closing a school in a community as small as ours without knowing at the time you close it what you are going to do with it just seems rash and unwise to me. So those are my thoughts.
Any other comments?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about, actually, when I was thinking about that, all of the schools, Josh had talked about the portables. And, we never discussed the fact that if you have a couple of good units one place and a couple of bad units someplace else, there's the possibility of replacing the bad units with those good units rather than fixing up the bad units. So that's something that might happen to those properties, is that the portables would be removed and replacing poor condition portables. And also, we haven't discussed at all any kind of an income that could come from those properties as sort of a positive effect of closing a school, But I agree that it's similar to saying, oh, we could lose these families, or we could do this, or we could lease it out and make this. It's very difficult to sort of quantify that number.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think it's very difficult to think in terms of anything other than cost savings, and even the savings that have been put in front of us are highly speculative. I mean, we don't have any kind of, at this point, at least that I'm aware of, any kind of a strategy for what we would do with surplus property, or who we would offer it to, or what the potential uses might be, or anything, right? So all I know is that you'd have to do some level of maintenance, because you can't let the property fall to garbage, right, if you want someone to use it. We're going to pay the 1% fee on the property value of anything that's fallow, so it's not going to be a net neutral thing no matter what we do. We're still going to have some level of expenses, and if I'm understanding correctly, we're not going to necessarily see a ton of layoffs either. So everything is highly speculative, which is really troubling for me, because I don't even know who might be interested in a property that we might surplus. And I know that who we can offer it to is somewhat restricted. This is not Los Angeles, right? There's not like a gazillion people who are looking for things to do. So I can envision a circumstance where we would surplus a property and no one, you give a party and nobody comes. I can envision a circumstance where we would have property, it would be surplus, and it would, how would we, I don't know that we could generate any interest at all.
I think those are really good points, not trying to be inject humor, but into a serious issue. But not only are we not Los Angeles, we're not Simi Valley either. They closed the 3 schools. Andy talked about it a week ago. They had a multiplicity of projects they could use those facilities to house. We just don't. I mean, the fact is, on May 3rd, we went through an hour plus of conversation. Andy made a presentation on behalf of the directors as to what it would take to move the services out of Ojai Avenue to some other places. We happened to, at that point, be talking about Miners Oaks only because that was the one school that was identified by the 7-Eleven committee as, think about us to house some programs, keep us open as a school, but we have extra space, so therefore think about us. In our case, I would say to you that if you were to identify any one of the 5 schools and then say, well, what could that become? I think you'd have 5 radically different answers, right? And we don't have 20 or 30 projects lined up to go to those places, including just the idea of moving out of Ojai Avenue. I understand, I attended all the 7-Eleven committee meetings, and I know that as those conversations went on, it became a very serious focus to first and foremost, let's move stuff out of OI Avenue, right? And then we'll get to the schools issue. I agreed with a lot of the things that they said. I did not agree with that. I think that there are issues that need to be attended to, whether the school board decides to keep all 5 schools open or have less than 5 schools, that have absolutely nothing to do with what happens on OI Avenue. But it is absolutely true that all of these conversations, from what would we, and I agree with Kevin, what might we use these buildings to house? That's speculative. How much savings would we have? How many dollars would we save? That's speculative. This is all speculative. How many students, I said this going back to May 3rd, how many students might we lose in inter and intra-district attendance if school A through E were to be closed? Highly speculative. If you're looking for certainties, this is the wrong issue. It just is, and that's why it's among the reasons why it's so difficult. Okay, it's difficult for all the emotional reasons and other reasons, historical reasons that Linda and others have articulated, but it's made more difficult because there are not very many certainties.
That said, I think it's important to say, because I think the counterpoint that someone could be thinking right now is, well, gee, things are hard, boy, that's just too hard, boo-hoo. But the truth is that, as you just pointed out, there are circumstances where you have more certainty than ours. I mean, Simi Valley had more certainty because Simi Valley actually had lined up uses for their schools. The boundaries of places like Simi Valley, and depending on which schools you're closing, could be such that inter-district transfer would not be as great a concern, because if you're closing a school in the center of Simi Valley, you're probably less likely to have someone leave the entire Simi Valley. Instead, they'll want to go to some other school within your boundaries. So we have, yes, it is uncertain, and yes, that is a theme of mine, but I don't want the portrayal to be, and I know you're not, I'm just speaking to somebody out there probably, the portrayal to be, oh, this is just too hard. That's not where I'm coming from. As I've said so many times, I feel like our first need in a situation like this is to do no harm. The last thing I'd want to do is do something thinking that I'm achieving some positive thing while also recognizing there are some negatives, and then go, oh, guess what? By the way, the negatives for sure, positive never happen.
I would like to go kind of directly to the question about what do we do with a piece of property if we do decide to close a school. And I think that's where it raises a lot of questions. Mike talked about the fee that we would have to pay. I think it might take effect in 5 or 7 years if we don't do something with the property. But that starts to become significant. I don't want to hire an appraiser to find out how much the school's worth and then figure out what that fee is, but we can ballpark it. If we want to sell one of these properties, who's going to buy a school in Ojai? It would probably have to be demolished, and if it's demolished, that would be expensive, and that might be as expensive as the property. So would we even realize any benefit from doing that? I don't know. Once we narrow down to a couple choices, hopefully at the end of the evening, I think we really need to ask more specific questions about these topics. And then I think I ran out of things to say, but I wanted to keep talking. So I'll stop. I think it's election season.
Yes. I think, didn't Donald Trump get interrupted at a church for repeating himself? Anyway, yes, it is difficult. All these questions are difficult, and I think we have to forge ahead. We're going to have to, come up with 2 options tonight and then vote on October 17th. So I want to move on to number 11. What would the new intra-district rules look like? Well, I can't imagine they'd be different.
Actually, no, I beg to differ.
Okay.
Because, and this would clearly be the epitome of speculation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It would so depend on which schools were, if we don't have the 5 schools, which schools would be remaining, who would have priority to go from their neighborhood school to another school. Once students are moved from the closed school to, let's say, the adjacent school, how many spots are open? How do you really measure open spots? There are just a multiplicity of questions. And so the way we looked at this was twofold. One, to not initially put any number on how many students how many inter-district students might decide not to come to the Ojai School District. Then as we processed the conversation, it became probably a little more realistic, still speculative, to try to come up with some number. And so when you look at Andy's updated analysis from last week compared to the 7-11 committee analysis, and I spoke with all the principals, I mentioned this a week ago, the median mean number seemed to be about a third. That's why those lost revenue dollars are included there. But it would take many hours, as I indicated in my notes, of conversations among board members, staff, community. Once it is determined, if it is determined, that there are less than 5 schools, depending on which school it is that's closed, how those rules would unfold. Some would be easier than others, much easier than others.
And I think it has to be revisited after a decision, simply because it would be very different, obviously, if you close San Antonio, because there's so many inter-district transfers there.
Right.
So that you can't answer that question without being specific to each site.
Right. So that was exactly, that's why I said what I said.
Okay. Any thoughts on number 11 that anybody wants to add?
Well, even if we could legally change the rules about transfers within our district, I wouldn't want to.
Right, actually, rules might be, that was the way the question was posed. And then there's a question later on, right, about whether you may in fact disallow students, just completely disallow students from moving from one school to another within your district. And the simplest and yet probably best answer, better answer between yes and no is no, right? There are some numerical standards you could probably set, but they would all be challenged if you did it. So it's not so much the rules, it's priorities, right? How do you determine whether or not there's space? Because in fact, in most of these scenarios, or many of these scenarios, there still would be space.
Okay.
Yeah, I just will mention, I actually found it kind of an interesting thing on doing some research from the Broad Foundation, and they actually have a guide, school closure guide, which sets forth a whole lot of information, outlines, things like that. But they do talk about if you were to close a school, that typically there are either the family choice idea or automatic reassignment. And then under the rubric of family choice, they ask, does your district already have a choice policy? If not, how are decisions going to be made? Well, we have one. Will reassigned students receive priority? We already talked about that. Will families be allowed, this is interesting, to relocate their student to a distant school? If so, what is the transportation policy, i.e., will the transportation be provided by the district? So that's one that we've never even considered, because I think we think it's just would be too expensive. But it's funny, this is the guide, and then it just sort of throws you into the wind with like lots of stuff to answer. Good luck.
Okay. Can we move on to 12?
Yeah.
Okay. In the consolidation savings chart, which we have, and Hank was kind enough to give us, and you guys probably got that in the back tables
Right.
also. This was prepared for the 7-11 committee. Please add offsetting projections of loss of enrollment and place Measure J savings in a column that correlates with individual schools. So that's what we've
The new
got.
one, it's the new one, right?
Yeah, so if you look at your chart, you can see that at the bottom of each one, there's fairly significant Measure J savings. And I do appreciate and understand parents' concerns about working for Measure J. I think that at the time that we were asking about Measure J, we hadn't looked as carefully at our enrollment projections as we did later, and realizing how scarce our students are becoming. We hadn't talked to real estate people who have been telling us about the numbers of people that are retired and that are buying homes in Ohio, second homes. So
I think
it's a concern.
And it's important to mention, however, that other issue, which is, I assume these Measure J savings are all in. It's assumption that we use no Measure J money on the school.
I was about to say that, Kevin, exactly. So the dollars that are in that row coincide pretty much exactly, right, with what you find in the Balfour Beatty May 30th, 2014 study. You can see that there's very little difference among the three large schools. They have almost the same number of classrooms, a $200,000 difference, just depending a little bit on what might be needed in one campus or the other, about half that cost at San Antonio and a fourth or so of that cost at Summit. So these are, savings is probably a misnomer, okay? It is the dollar figure that was assigned in the assessment report to that school, right? So yeah, you're right. In other words, if not $1 were to be spent at that school, that's how many dollars would be, quote, not spent, right? Completely unrealistic. It's not there, and you can see it's not at the bottom of a column, which therefore yields a net result. It's just a row.
And obviously, roofs would have to be repaired no matter whether the site was closed or not. And so the buildings could be maintained. So anyway, anybody have any comments on this question?
No, other than thank you for the additional work.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Should we move on to 13? Add all 7-Eleven committee reports back to the district home. Oh, well,
That's all done.
We've done. Okay, done that.
And just so you know, and we have, all of the 7-Eleven committee work is in a separate section of the homepage, and we have now created a beautiful little seal that David Rogers loves, David in the back. It's good. He always puts little words around it, so this is elementary schools configuration icon, right at sort of the very top of the homepage, and all the documents that we've been talking about have been added and will be added as we go along.
Number 14, we've pretty much is about the 6th grade moving, the possibility of the 6th grade moving to Mataha. I think we've decided that we're postponing that until after this discussion. So if the board is okay with this particular question, we'll move on to the next one. Is that all right with everyone? All right, and then the same thing for number 15, and number 16, can we limit the number of intra-district transfer students between our schools?
I think I'd like to agree with Thane on that. You know, whether we can or not, I'm not interested in doing that.
I agree.
So it's a moot point for me.
I think that's a plus for our district, that we're able to allow students to attend schools that they prefer. And any other thoughts on that? Okay. Number 17, it would be good for
Michael, I think, has.
Yeah, you know, we've heard comments on both sides of this issue. We've heard comments that suggest that there may be some people who feel that, and I'm going to use this word consciously, that we're ghettoizing certain non-English speakers into one school. I've also heard comments on the other side, and a number of the people that I've spoken to, I've not seen it as a negative at all. What I've seen is that people are comfortable in a welcoming environment that is beginning to very much be responsive to their needs. And so that's my long way of saying I'm probably not in a mind to change that. But there has been a lot of conversation about you know, isolating a certain population. And I think, you know, along with not changing that, we would need to do something, I think, and I don't know what it is, but to assure that that's not what's happening.
And Michael, just to round out the comments, it is true, and in fact, during the analysis by the 7-Eleven committee, and this is also on the website, Andy produced a chart showing the percentage of students, Hispanic, Caucasian students, who are now attending each school and who would attend the school if we only had neighborhood attendance at schools. So that's point number one. Point number two, it's clear as a result of many years, decades or so, of the intra-district policy, that the percentage of Hispanic students at Miners Oaks is higher now than it would be if students were only permitted to attend their neighborhood schools, which is a moot point anyway because state law doesn't allow that, where the school district may not implement that policy if you may not use intra-district enrollment. But I think the other point that was made, and this was more, I think, in the last meeting than any other meeting I've attended or heard about, is that there is a disproportionate ability to be mobile, right? And so parents who have more means, who have the ability to transport in their own car, child from school A to B, right? That as a result of that, over a period of time, that can contribute to, in this case, with a higher percentage of parents who are less able to do that at Miners Oaks, you have then a higher percentage of students who have not gone to other schools, right? So just in terms of the dialogue and rounding out the text, if you will, I think that was a point that was made pretty eloquently at the last meeting.
And I also think, I think the Miners Oaks PTA was very, vocal in the point of advertising what their school has, and each school, and I was a very involved parent in the schools my children were at, and when I came on the board, I learned so much more. So I thought, wow, if I didn't know this stuff, that means there's a lot of information out there that people don't know. So getting that information out and letting them know what the schools have besides the numbers. I know a lot of people leave schools based on how many students are in a classroom, or how many classrooms they have, or how many students are on the campus in general, but there's so much other elements to the schools that are important to get out to the community.
I would just add, after Susie's presentation last week, I went to my law library, so to speak, which now is a computer, of course, and it was a really, it resonated with me, the issue of a school that's, I don't know if it meets the legal definition of a segregated school, but certainly you have, as everyone knows, a higher population of Latinos there, and some Caucasian people who have left that district. I believe we do have an obligation to take, I think the terms, reasonable and achievable, I think, are the terms that the courts have said. We all recognize we can't force people to stay at Miners Oaks, but we can certainly take steps to encourage them to go there. And I certainly, I've been pondering the magnet school idea and the idea of doing some marketing of the school and encouraging people to consider not going elsewhere. And I think that's kind of what we have to do. And I had a conversation with Hank about it, and I know he agrees that marketing the school in particular is a good idea. I'll let him speak for himself, but bottom line is I think that's a theme that all of us appreciated.
Well, I can usually speak for myself. I appreciate that.
In this case, though, I think
Thank
I
you.
got it. So.
Thank you for the segue. Well, I'll tell you, just as a quick story, I didn't learn until after the meeting was over. I was actually talking with Susie, that the brochure that was presented that Susie and Gina, right? Gina and Susie did for last week was like whipped off in about a day. Now, I can only imagine what kind of document they might whip off if they had a week. Mm-hmm. But it's remarkable. I commend it to all of you. Bring lots of copies. I'm sure there'll be many distributed tomorrow night at back to school night. And in fact, each school does have not only its own personality and its own specific programming, but I would say unequivocally that as the years have unfolded through Janice Duncan's work and many other people's work, Food for Thought and David White, and et cetera, that this whole, exactly what Renee Roth was talking about early on, that the environment, that's a bad pun, I guess, but the environment at Miners Oaks for this green schools movement, whereby they've been identified now among schools in the entire nation for well over 3 to 5 years as remarkable in this domain. It's already there. And now there are other things that are already there in other schools, but this particular program is not only unique within the district in terms of its intensity and magnitude among the elementary schools, but I'm going to tell you it's unique in the county, and I'm going to say probably in the state and the nation, at least in terms of recognition. So I think you're right on track. Now, what I can't promise you, because it's just a matter of individual family desire, is how much that means. Okay, it could mean a lot to some, because it's the kind of thing, the kind of way that the parents have raised their children and want the children to be raised. But I think you're right on track in terms of getting it done the right way to meet the kind of standard that Kevin was talking about.
We have a public comment from Susie Taylor.
Thank you. I wasn't prepared to speak tonight, so I don't have anything planned, but I just wanted to thank Director Rupp for reviewing Missouri versus Jenkins. I think if you have time, even though you may not have a legal background, if you read past the first paragraph of what you'll find on the internet, you'll see that it does give parents a right to choose, and we do value our open school policy. And the remainder of that information is that it really isn't an issue until you have an imbalance at your schools. And what that ruling, I guess maybe would be the right word to say, is that it reminds the school districts that you have the authority to identify that you do have an imbalance, and you have to look at ways to have that reversed, and it has to be voluntary. And that is where our green ribbon schools, our magnet schools come into play. And that voluntary retention is vital, I think, in our community, in attracting people from Ventura. And I'm going out on a limb here. Tomorrow is our back to school night, and we have that brochure out as a draft. Is that an approval that we can produce it and send it out?
Yes,
Because I haven't printed it yet.
You have approval to do that.
The whole meeting was
okay.
for that. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really what caught my ear. But again, we're not saying, I agree, I think segregation is a really hard word. It's something we don't want to really have to discuss. It's not easy to discuss or admit that we have an issue. And I don't necessarily think that we're even complaining, but until it comes to school closure, school consolidation, and then it does become an issue because we look at the needs and the means, and we have to, as a school board, you are tasked with the responsibility of making sure that there is then an effort to have that voluntary movement. And I don't think that you could vote tonight to say that you've made that effort. I think as an incoming, new to the PTA, new to this issue over the last 18 months, we have been shaken up. And I don't think a school closure is the solution. I think it has made us aware that we can't stop now. You know, we can't stop in 10 years. We have to keep this momentum going to market our schools and attract, just like Ventura schools have done an excellent job identifying which school offers the best for each child and making sure that the public knows their choices. Because I don't think that my neighbor knows that she chooses to go to another school, but I don't think she knows what her neighborhood school actually offers. So I would like to see that aggressive marketing, whether it's through PTA or through the local administrators, but I'd like to see it embraced and give us some time to make those changes and bring more money to the district.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any more comments about number 17? Or we're moving on to number 17, sorry. Any comments about 17? We've got the list of the repairs that need doing, and we know that there is money allocated for each school to do that through the Measure J. We know that. Any comments about 17 from anybody? Okay, moving on to 18. Andy, if you could tell us what we've missed, what financially we've not achieved by the parcel tax not passing. I know it was very
Sure.
close, so.
So we've had 2 parcel taxes in the past, just over a decade period. First one failed to even garner 50%. It was a more expensive parcel tax. I believe it was going to be a $150 assessment per year over a 7-year period, I believe it was. It was going to bring in about $1.4 million to the district. Like I said, parcel taxes required 2/3 vote, and this one had less than half. The community went back out for another vote in 2008 with Measure P. Measure P did fail by 71 votes, extremely close. It was 65+% in favor, just barely below that 2/3 margin. That would have brought in approximately $750,000 per year over the life of that parcel tax.
So.
And the important thing that, again, I think everyone in the audience is aware, but distinction between parcel tax and the facility bond is that parcel tax does have greater freedom in the choice in the way the funds are expended. So they could have actually been going toward restoration of furlough days during that period, or could have been going towards staff salary enhancements. Whereas the facility bond is very restricted in being specifically for facilities.
If anybody remembers, was there anything in particular that we think led to the defeat of both of those? I mean, because the $150 a year, that's like $12 a month, right?
No, the other one was $85.
Right, the Measure P, the more recent one was even less. Yeah, it was in the 80s.
And I think that even had a provision for senior
a
citizens.
senior citizen opt-out clause.
Because that's what we had heard the first time, was that the senior citizens couldn't afford the parcel tax and also didn't see the value as much because they didn't have school-age children.
Yeah, although the property values with a good district are supported for everybody. So,
yes.
But that's the marketing.
Well, in answer to that question, I mean, there were a lot of people who voted against it, right? And I think that many years ago, when our kids were in school, I remember there being, very visible disagreements between the district and the teachers union. There was a lot of, discord. When I was working with the OEF, I would get feedback from a lot of people. We'd rather give you money because we trust you. We're kind of suspicious about the district being able to spend money properly. I think we need to have that open conversation to talk about. Now, I think things have changed dramatically over the last decade. And I think that, as a school board, we have tried to be very open with the community. I think with Hank and with Andy and the expertise that they've brought, and with a very open relationship with the teachers union, I think a lot of those issues have, I'm not going to say gone away, because there are always people who feel the way they do, but I don't think that there's the kind of mistrust that there was in decades past. And so when you ask the question why, what was the counter argument, I think that those were some of the reasons. There's always the people who say, I don't want to pay taxes because I don't trust the government to spend the money. I think that's true at the federal level and at the local level. But I think we've done a lot in the last several years to overcome those concerns, and maybe it's time.
Any other thoughts about the parcel tax? Oh, one more comment. Okay. Lori Hammer. Good.
I'm going to speak off the cuff too. I worked on both of those parcel taxes. I agree that the first one, the number was high, and there wasn't a senior exemption, and that was the feedback that we got, like, oh, we should have taken that into consideration. The second one, considerably lower. I think it was even a shorter period of time, right? It went from 7 years to 5 years. $89, senior exemption. And I went back recently, because I worked hard on both of those, and I remember it was the first time I was getting like the phone slammed down in my ear, and I was a little bit personally wounded by those. But I went back and started reading the anonymous blog comments from 2008, which, you know, trolls on the internet, they're so, they feel so free, but there was a lot of comments from 2008 about why doesn't the district office develop the downtown property? Those were some of the facts, and if we're looking at identifying 71 votes, that's so close. That was one of the pieces. But I really agree with Kara earlier in talking about the community's efforts to pass Measure J, and we did so, and then considering that our community, our teachers, our actual unrestricted income could benefit from a parcel tax, I see a school consolidation move really endangering that down the line in terms of trusting the district to do the right thing by them. If we were so close in 2012, right? That was when the parcel tax went through. Was it 12? Eight, sorry. If we were so close in 2008, you know, maybe this is an opportunity to look ahead and look at our, you know, newly enlivened school populations and families to say, you know, this is our chance, and this is where money can go right to these people sitting here in the front row. And, you know, if you talk about selling a school, we know that that money cannot be used to pay those people in the front row. So that's off the table. So I really just wanted to speak to that, and I thank you, and I agree that there were some talk about mistrust, and I agree completely with Mr. Whipple that the feeling is different out there now. It's palpably different. I think the OEF has done a lot to engender a lot more transparency. I think our current board and administration has done a lot more to reach out, and that transparency is there, and there's a lot more inclusion and a lot less distrust. So there might be an avenue down the line to revisit that topic again. So I certainly would make more phone calls.
Thank you. We thank you very much for all your comments. We're going to take a short break. We're going to take a 10-minute break. So we're going to come back and then have our hopeful arrival at some sort of choice of two options. And so we'll come back,
over there, same
and we're going to go to the room, whatever that room is. The science room, okay. And there's lemonade and cookies for everybody, so you're all welcome to come see what you get when you come to a school board meeting.
So this is a real cliffhanger.
Yeah, this is.
When we come back, we're actually going to talk about.
Okay. All right, we're going to reconvene. Thank you all for being here. I know this isn't easy for any of us, so. All right, our next task is to choose two possibilities that we will be considering in more depth of the configuration.
Out of the six
Out of the
options.
6, yeah. And you all have those. They were up on the table out out in the lobby. So I would like to open it up, maybe just, Jane, I would like to start with you. Could you let me know the two options that you prefer? Just so we kind of get started on this.
So, do you think it's important to talk about them, or to just say, I'd like to keep number 1, keep all 5 schools open. I do not like the idea of closing any of the large schools. So for me, that would be option 2, I would take off. And option 6, I would take off. I don't believe it is an advantage to the district to close San Antonio because of there does seem to be between Summit and San Antonio a desire in this community for a small school, so I would like us to maintain a small school. My concern that I would like to, I have a lot of questions, so it's not that I would get answered, I guess, at the next meeting. About the combinations at Summit concern me, and I did have a great meeting with Mary Ann Radcliffe last week, so I have some no small school questions about that, but I think if, for me personally, if we were to focus on any school, it would be, I need information about Summit, so I would ask to keep that 1, 2, 3, 4th option on the table.
All right. Michael, what about you?
Okay. I would definitely keep option number 1 on the table. I also am not, at this point, open to closing the large schools. I think if we were going to look at anything, I would look at either San Antonio or Summit or both. So if we're limited to 2 options, then I would say close none or close San Antonio and Summit. If we're going to 3, I'd say close Summit.
Okay. How about you, Kevin?
I would keep all schools open, and my choices would be the 2 options being keep all schools open and closing Summit. Summit would be the only school I would consider closing.
Okay. Dane?
I would like the opportunity at some point to talk about my rationale, but my only choice would be to keep all 5 schools open. I'm happy to discuss other options, but that's the only one that I would put on the table.
Okay. And my number 1 choice would be to close San Antonio and Summit, as much as it breaks my heart to do that. And then my second choice would be to keep all 5 schools open. So, I think we've got 5 votes, possibly, to keep all 5 schools open. And then we have 2 votes to possibly close Summit and 2 votes to possibly close San Antonio and Summit. So, do we want to go to do you want to talk about your rationale? Would you like to do that?
Sure.
You
So I think there are really compelling reasons to close schools. There are annual savings. I don't think they're as high as what's on the chart, but they're there. And we're always looking for money, so that's something we always need to consider. The same as with the Measure J allocation. With the larger schools, we're talking about $3 million. We would have to spend some of it just to keep the facility from totally falling apart, but we wouldn't have to spend all of it, and that money could be reallocated to other schools. For the smaller schools, it's less money, but nearing $1 million, again, we'd have to spend some of it, but we could spend the rest on something else. I know there are a lot of other projects that we want to spend money for, so I think that's important. I'm going to spend all my time arguing against myself, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
I think that if we were to close 1 or more schools, we would have fewer combo classes. I think arguably we would be able to provide somewhat better education for some students because of the fewer combo classes, maybe we'd be able to allocate more resources for English language learners. Teachers might be able to collaborate a little bit more. There was a discussion about eco-friendly and the great things that Miners Oaks is doing for that. At the same time, a smaller footprint is eco-friendly, right? So if we had a smaller footprint, that could potentially help. And then we would be able to focus our resources and focus our attention on the remaining schools. And the less you focus, the less you focus. Having considered all of those things, and perhaps our ability to take some of that money on the annual savings and put it towards teachers. We want to pay teachers as much as we can. But after having considered all of those things, yes, we could be slightly better at, a little more money, a little more, focus on education. But we're never going to get to the point, I don't think, by closing schools, that we're going to counterbalance what we lose by not providing the choice of all of the schools that we have. As I watch the 7-Eleven committee deliberate, as we've discussed it ourselves, every single one of our campuses has a completely and totally different personality. It really offers something different to the families and students who attend those campuses. And I think we would be losing something significant in our district by, cutting off a limb, so to speak. And compared to other districts in the county, they can pay teachers more money. They have more money to do that. We're not going to compete against them on any of those points. But I think what we can compete with is choice and the variety of learning environments. I don't know that anybody offers the variety that we do, and I'm really proud of that. And I think it's something that's uniquely Ojai, and I really don't want to lose it, even though going into this, I'm making it clear that I understand what the trade-offs are. We are sacrificing if we keep all the schools open. And to think that we're not sacrificing by doing that, I think is a big mistake. But I'm willing to make that sacrifice so that we can have the neighborhood schools, so that we can have the choice, and that we can have the educational environments that are targeted to the families and the students in our valley. That's my rationale, and I'll probably say less later, but thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Say less
Later.
Jane, would you like to talk about your thoughts on closing Summit?
So the information that I would ask, I'm going to ask Andy to go over the necessary small schools funding and find a number perhaps that we could possibly reach in attendance at Summit that would provide the funding for a third teacher. Because my concerns with Summit are the combination, the 4-grade combination. As wonderful as those teachers are, I can't imagine that the education they're getting with the Common Core in the 5th and 6th grades is going to be as achievable as it is at the other schools when you have fewer grades. But if we can't afford a third teacher, I'd have a different opinion about Summit.
So I can give the technical answer to that now, and I don't know if Hank will want to round out the answer, but the technical answer for necessary small schools is the funding increment increases when you have 49.
Well, I have those numbers, so because I looked back at the, right, 4 years ago, Summit had 75 students, is that right? Mm-hmm. Something like that? Yes. And it dropped down before the teachers dropped down.
It dropped a little bit, and then as the apparent demand with students moving out decreased, I had to make a decision about whether I was going to put a third teacher in what appeared to be a group of about 48 to 50 students.
But it dropped down to 48 before the teacher decision was made, right?
No, it didn't drop that far. Let's just get let me get my years in order here. Hold on. Okay, so let's see. So
12, 13.
Summit had 73 students as recently as 2012-13, when there were 62. Well, okay, it dropped from 73 to 62, but when there were 62, I only put two teachers there, and that was in the height of our financial crisis. We were in the 4th year of furlough days, and I simply didn't feel it was appropriate to have class sizes of 20 in one school and class sizes of 30 plus in the others. So that year, that was the highest student-faculty ratio by quite a bit. Then I think it could be argued, and I agree with this, by the way, and Mary Ann and I have had this conversation many, many times, that the moving from 3 teachers in 2012-13, when there were 73 students, to 2 teachers when there were 62 students, that then precipitated a drop from 62 to 38 the next year, and then the next year, and now this is the 3rd year of the it's the 4th year of 2 teachers, but the 3rd year of enrollment in that high 30 to low 40 range. And you know, all I can say is there were decisions being made all over the district about how to use staff and how to reduce staff in order to make the budget work. And there was a point in time, in my opinion, in the 13-14 year where we had hit the crossroads of not being able to afford a 3rd teacher there anymore. So, you know, who was not served? Well, predominantly, and this is a financial issue, I understand, you know, there never was a majority of students from Santa Paula, but there was a higher number. And remember, too, that in that 12-13 to 13-14 period of time, that's exactly when Santa Paula merged the elementary and the high school district into one. Many of their rules and regulations changed, and the predominant item that changed was their interest in signing inter-district enrollment, students moving from Santa Paula to our district.
So in 13-14, they still allowed it?
They did, but it was closing. It was closing. So the students, many of those students were still with us. The ones that were there when we had 73, most of them were still there when we had 62. Then they were moving out, and then they were not replaced in 14-15 and thereafter by a large number. We tried. Teresa, who's here tonight, tried as best she could. Mary Ann, others tried to get families to commit from Santa Paula to come to our district before January 1st, right, of the year, right? So we are a district of choice. We just couldn't get them to make that decision. They wanted to make the decision in May. And once they tried to make that decision, the inter-district enrollment constriction was taking place in Santa Paula, and they felt they wanted to keep their students, and that is their prerogative.
So that, for me, is the big, you know, we were talking about hypotheticals. So if I look at Summit's Santa Paula residents, prior to the 2-teacher enrollment, or 2-teacher setup, it was 30 students. The question is, can it get anywhere near 30 students again?
I don't believe so.
I don't either. And my concern is the Santa Paula unification, the Limonella Ranch creating a possible new elementary school over there, and the you know, again, the sort of curriculum changes that we have had and how they affect a teacher teaching multiple grades.
One more thing, Dan, on the numbers. So there clearly is a chicken and egg argument here, right? So when Mary Ann and some others and I have spoken, their absolute belief is that if we were to commit to a 3rd teacher and we were not to back off of the 3rd teacher, then, for example, the 13 inter-district students last school year at Summit, all from Santa Paula, and maybe one from Fillmore, and about the same number this year, that, you know, sort of the old field of dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. So if you put the 3rd teacher there, then the 13 could be 23, perhaps. I don't think it'll be 33, but it could be 23. And so could 42 become 52? I think it could. I do. But more speculation.
Right. And so my question for you is, at 52, I mean, I know last year we talked about $12,000 being the advantage of the no necessary small schools. That doesn't pay for a 3rd teacher. So at what number does the no necessary small schools actually enhance our budget enough to afford a 3rd teacher at Summit?
So I'll answer that directly, but I'd like to also back up to make sure we remember what the factors are that lead to the school qualifying for necessary small school funding. At 48.5 ADA is when they qualify for that new tier of funding. That funding is approximately $460,000 if we have a 3rd teacher. So in order to have 48.5 ADA, you need roughly 52 students or so. So at 52 students with a third teacher, they would qualify for that increased funding.
And I'd like to point out, but then they require that we have the third teacher.
In order to receive the funding,
Correct.
that's correct. So although if you have the third teacher, the extent to which necessary small schools becomes a better revenue source than LCFF, that gap is about $80,000. So the gain goes from $12,000 up to an $80,000 gain to the district. However, because there's also an increased cost in having the teacher, if we had 52 students or 51 students with only 2 teachers, it would actually net to the same overall amount because you'd be saving roughly $70,000, $75,000 our average cost of a teacher, and you'd also be losing out on that revenue. So the 52 students with 2 teachers and 52 students with 3 teachers then qualifying for NSS actually has about the same effect on the district. But let me go back though.
So if you have 52 students and 3 teachers, it would be the same as having 42 students and 2 teachers, basically.
Actually, 42, well, again, if we're talking purely financial, 42 students actually is more profitable financially. If you're talking about
For NSS and 2 teachers, or?
Right.
I guess what I'm trying to say is there a way for us to keep Summit open by adding a third teacher and drawing more students?
So that's what I was going to say. Let's go back to remember what the factors are that allow the school to qualify for NSS. First one we know we've met, and that's that the district has to be under 2,500 ADA. We're there, we have reliable projections that we're not going to be exceeding that amount, so that's not a criteria to worry about. The next 2 are the ones that matter. First one is that we have to have at least 15 students who live at least 5 miles from the next closest public school. And right now we only have, Teresa, you may know better than I do because I only remember the numbers from last year and I've looked at the matriculation, but 16 students is where we were last at when I looked at the number of students who meet that geographic requirement. So any student coming in from Santa Paula won't help us on that criteria because they are living within a 5-mile boundary of one of the Santa Paula schools. And it has to be OUSD students anyway. Actually, I apologize for that fact as well. It has to be 15 students within the OUSD boundaries. So if we were trying to drive up an overall school population to that 52, 53 student threshold and doing it exclusively through inter-district or district of choice students coming from Santa Paula, we'd still be teetering on that edge of whether or not we'd qualify for NSS because of the requirement to have at least 15 OUSD students who meet that geographic requirement. So it's possible that a decision would need to be made that we really need to focus on both those numbers, that we weren't going to be teetering and waiting to see if any families left like last year where we had 42 students at the beginning of the year and then lost 2 or 3 around the Thanksgiving and winter break. If those students happen to leave and they were the one student who pushed us over that threshold, then all of a sudden we'd lose the entire NSS funding.
So NSS is not like when we talk about, the 3 categories that give us the bump from LCFF, the reduced.
Correct. It's a separate funding source.
It's not incremental. But it's not incremental. That's incremental, right?
Exactly. This
Whereas
is, I call it a
lump.
tranche system, or it's
Right.
kind of a tier system of where you're receiving the same amount of funding. Right now, we actually receive the same funding for having 43 students at the school this year, as if we could have said no Santa Paula students at all. We're going to only teach the 28 or 30 students who are OUSD students. We would have received the same funding level. So right now we do not see an incremental increase in funding based on going from 43 up to 44 or dropping down to 42, which is the purpose of the system, is that when a small school goes from 42 students and happens to have a few students leave throughout the school year, that would have been a precipitous drop in the site funding. But what they allow is for it to be smoothed over by not having a 3% or 5% net decrease in funding based on just happening to have 2 students leave the site mid-year.
See, one of the reasons I wanted to produce the charts or give you the charts that we did for the 7-11 committee, if you take a look at both the intra-district and inter-district, just look at 2015-16 because it tells a very interesting story. So there were 42 students last year, and there were 42 students at Summit, 13 inter-district, obviously then 26 because there were 3 intra-district students. So about a 2-to-1 ratio or so in district compared to inter-district. Now you go to the next page and look at the intra-district students leaving Summit to go to more going to San Antonio, but a reasonable number going to Topatopa. So there were 25 students who left Summit to go to the other schools. Not unusual because we had that all over the district. So, you know, there is a contingent of students who live within the Summit geography who could populate that school at a larger number, but that's the case with every school, right? And so I guess I come back to this projected, speculative, can't really know exactly what the situation would be. We just know that we're at a point of reasonable stability over the last, let's just say 3 years, of 38, 42, and this year we're in that low 40 range students at Summit with about the same number of inter-district students. It was 17 2 years ago, 13 last year, this year 15 the last time I looked. And we think that's pretty much the story of Summit, just like we know the story of San Antonio, which forever has been somewhere between a quarter and a third students who live in the San Antonio geography, and a high number of intra-district students with some inter-district. And, you know, we're talking before about Oak Park and some other places. You know, every school's situation is determined so much by geography. If you think about coming to the Ojai Unified School District as an inter-district student, and you're coming from either the west or the east, San Antonio would not be a first choice, right? You'd have to go past 3 schools coming from the west to get there, and you'd have to go past 1 school from the east to get there. So, you know, there are other choices, and so there's a reason why the inter-district enrollment at San Antonio last year is 10, this year could well be about the same. But anyway, that's the Summit story, okay? I do think that a third teacher would increase enrollment, but I cannot tell you how much. And I do not
Because
think,
some of the, I'm sorry,
No, okay.
some of the students who are at San Antonio might return to Summit.
They might, that's what I'm trying to say.
because there's a third teacher.
I think some would, and I am persuaded that would occur to some extent. In my opinion, looking at all the resources that I had to deliver across the district, it was not a good choice when we were yet to possibly meet the criteria for necessary small schools. But we only passed that threshold last year because the ADA in the district was less than 2,500. Okay, it wasn't there until
No,
last
I
year.
agree. When that number was 62, I think that was a correct decision. I know, because they were getting 33 and 34 students at the other
Exactly. And there
schools.
and there were years, even the years you can see before that, when we had, 73 and 74, the average class size was 24, 25, 26. It was 7 to 8 more, 6 to 8 more across the district in those first really terrible years of state funding cutbacks.
We have another public comment.
I was actually
Oh, you're not
wondering.
finished?
No,
Okay, I'm
I'm
sorry.
just feeling like I don't know.
Sorry,
Do you want to keep taking public comments now, or do we want to, I kind of want to feel like the board goes through, unless that's what you're,
Well, my feeling is, you know, sometimes the things that we are saying up here create some, you know, something that a community member wants to say, and I feel it's important to let them say it. Were you finished with what?
Yes,
with
I'm
your comments? Okay. 2. Okay. So, and I apologize, I can't read the writing. Is it Cheney? Charlie.
That's
Okay. Charlie H.
That's her mom.
That's her mom. Okay. Very good. So I apologize. I'm going to ask people to print.
I plan on speaking, and I'm kind of nervous to speak, but the topic of the third teacher for Summit hits me, and it hits the community. And my kids did go to Summit, and losing the third teacher lost a lot of kids. So if you're asking, if you bring in a third teacher, they will come. There's a lot of people up there that leave the district. They go down to Ventura, they go to homeschool, they go to private schools. And that, a lot of them left. My kids left the school when you guys went down to 2 teachers. A lot of kids did. So if you go back to 3 teachers, you will get the numbers, to answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Mary Ann Ratcliffe.
for or
try to keep
against,
this
Mary
brief. I'm
Ann?
glad I'm here this week. And I don't want to go into this at great length, but Charlie, I'm so glad Charlie spoke. The person who's not here tonight, who I just ran into the school office at some of the other day, was Sherry Usher. She said, Marian, I really want to be at that meeting. Can you tell me about the development that's going in at the Proctor House in Santa Paula? I want to be there because I'm so excited. I don't know Mrs. Usher very well. She wasn't there when my kids were there. She says, I'm so excited about the learning environment that's going on with Summit. She says, I'm so excited about what we're doing here with our combination classes, which she called, by the way, curiosity-based learning. That was her phrase that she introduced at the 7-Eleven committee that I had never heard before. She says, this is what Common Core is all about. I'm speaking for her. I hope that she will speak at the next meeting. I'm just telling you what we were talking about in the office a couple of days ago. Just when I have the students who are farther behind, they've got the perfect fit. They're learning this lesson. The kids who are
Marianne, slow down.
The kids who are advanced, it's a perfect, easy fit to move them up. She goes, with other situations, with other classes, you have to pull them out. She goes, it doesn't happen in this perfect environment that is so well suited to modern day learning and to Common Core. So when you talk about the negative of combination classes, here's a teacher I don't even know who's so enthused, who I'm hearing nothing but good things from other parents, who is telling us that the learning environment at Summit is ideal. So I just wanted to just express to you a brief conversation that Mrs. Usher, I hope, will have with your board before your decision is made tonight.
We're not making a decision, we're just choosing options.
Yeah, before you make a decision. We do have a lot of our 19 to 24, is that the number? I always knew 19 for sure, of the kids who go down to Ohio. I just want to I've talked to you guys a lot about
25
this.
last year.
Okay, 25.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely, I mean, I've talked with every single one of these parents. I know this issue so well, but one thing that struck me when I was coming to the meeting last night, it's a long way to come from my house, and that was a point that Mr. The grandpa, the fourth generation grandpa, Rod Thompson. He's like, a lot of time is spent going down on a bus and coming back on a bus from up there. But the impression that I had when I was driving to this meeting, it's a long way, and there's a big Denison grade there. And honestly, it just came to my mind as I was going to this meeting last week, I would not have brought my kids to Ohio Unified School District. I'm in the Ohio Unified School District, but my life is that way. So I absolutely would not be here if there were not a Summit School. And that is so many of the families. It's just an impediment to come all the way here. You would find, because Summit School existed on its own and had a vote of the people in the 60s to become a part of Ohio for the resources, that the people are attached, not because it's their school, it's because it is vital to that community. It's vital to have your learning environment for your kids not all the way down the Denison grade several miles away from where you live. And it's why necessary small schools exist at the state level. And to me, that necessary small schools as a state program is an affirmation of what I've always felt, is that it's a community that is it's away from the rest of Ohio Unified School District schools, and the state law recognizes that if there's a geographical like a mountain, that's something that they take into consideration when they're deciding what is a necessary small school. And Summit School meets every single one of their definitions. I could go on so much more, and I won't. But it is, again, the gateway for more revenue for the district. $730,000 in the last 5 years.
Okay.
I just want to add one fact, okay? I agree with Charlie. I do think that I agree with the part that students would return with a third teacher. I never felt otherwise, except I will say that while this chart takes us back to 2011-12, and Mary Ann's the perfect person to recall this with me, I kept 3 teachers there in 2010-11 when there were somewhere, this is by memory now, somewhere in the mid to upper 50s or 60 at the most. And that winter into spring was when Marianne and I sat down and said, I cannot keep a 3rd teacher there unless a significant increase in enrollment occurs. And that was when she and Kim Rivers and others did everything possible in Santa Paula, including putting up balloons at the July 4th parade, as I recall. You know, say, come to Summit, and they produced 25 more students, and there was a great article in the Ojai Valley News about it. Everybody was thrilled, and it was a very different environment. But before that occurred, there were 50 to 60 students at Summit with 3 teachers. So that's why I'm not ready to sit here and say, if you have 3 teachers, there will be 60 to 70 students. I don't know how many, more than 42, less than 70, you know, somewhere in that rather large span.
Okay, so we're continuing our discussion here. So Kevin, do you want to talk about your second choice, which was closing Summit?
Sure. So you know, I think my general preference is to keep all the schools open based on what I've heard so far. That being said, I think that we have to consider closing Summit because of resources. Even now, with 43 students and 2 teachers, the class sizes up at Summit are substantially smaller than they are across our district. So people across the district whose kids are being educated by us, you know, are in larger classes. And so you have to ask yourself, you know, what is the fair allocation of resources in our district? And is it fair that, you know, that a smaller group in a particular area on a per student basis are getting more of those resources, substantially more. So I think it's a question we have to ask. And the things that I'm interested in, I'm not particularly concerned about combo classes. And frankly, I trust the parents' judgment if they think and want their children to be educated at Summit, and I'm sure, and I was there for their graduation, and I've talked and raved about it since then. You know, it is a great vibe up there, and it's very unusual. And speaking to Thane's idea of these unique characteristics of Ojai, that's real. I mean, that is real, and those things, whether it's here in the school board or in the city council, you know, Ojai has some very special characteristics, and I just sometimes wonder if we in real time really understand how easy it would be to screw it up. So I am hesitant to do anything to change the current configuration of our schools, but and I love the fact that we have this, like, you know, this outpost, this castle on the edge of our realm. But I think I have to consider it, and I do something sometimes. Now that I'm on the school board, I do something like a mind game, or I don't know what you call them, a mind experiment, where I say, you know, what did I think before I was on the board when everything was so easy? What were the things I thought? And one of the things I thought was they should close Summit. And I'm not sure, and I am probably currently somewhat not in favor of closing Summit, but I definitely think we should talk about it in earnest. We've come this far. I did notice something, though, that I think might be a problem, because in the savings that we're scheduling for Summit, we include $51,000 for the principal.
That's a portion.
Right, but if Teresa is now just the principal at San Antonio, would she only get the current portion that goes? She's a full-time.
Yeah, the way
she'd be
it's
a full-time principal.
Right, the way it's allocated now actually would be potentially, there are a lot of things. Just pretend you're not here, Teresa. There, there are a lot of things that Teresa could do, okay, but one of which, depending on how you moved from tonight on to next Tuesday night or Wednesday night, whenever it is you make your decision on that tentative position, one of which would be to be more time at San Antonio than split between the two, because it's a larger school. This is split about 70%, 30% kind of thing, 60-40 in that range. When I came here, Teresa was both the principal of San Antonio and a 2-day week, right? 2-day week? 6th grade teacher, sharing with Robin Munson, if I remember correctly. So she's done that. There've been shared principals across the district over the years. When I came, Marilyn Smith was still the principal of Summit and chaparral and alternative education. So Teresa has been the predominant time principal with some teaching, but there are other things that that Andy could assign to her for next year. Anyhow, that's the way it's split out.
But all that said, I do want to say, and it I think applies in particular to Summit, that a school in a community is more than just a school. And I think particularly up at Summit, you know, it is a community center. It is a refuge. It's a place where people can meet. It is a social hub. So I think as a school board, we need to consider all of the benefits of our schools, because I think in doing that, we actually really sort of itemize how lucky we are to have such great public schools, you know, and we appreciate them because they do so much more than simply teach our kids how to read.
Okay, Michael, you want to talk about your thoughts on your second choice was closing San Antonio and Summit. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah.
And you can also incorporate your thoughts about not closing it.
Sure. You know, I go back to something that someone said in my notes, I don't know when they said it, but mentioned something about decision of necessity. And that's kind of where I am on all of this. You know, you can always save a little bit of money by closing things, but there are community disruption issues, there are student loss issues, there are community disruption issues, because to me, you know, every neighborhood school is the center of its neighborhood. Particularly elementary schools, because of the age of the kids and the fact that the parents need to be so involved. And so I kind of get to a place where if I'm going to consider closing anything at all, it's got to be for a really good reason, and it's got to be for a significant reason. I wouldn't be interested in closing a school to save, you know, $100,000. To me, that's nothing. I'm sensitive to the faculty. I deal with it at work as well, in terms of very, very limited budgets and what I would call below market pay. But, you know, there's no magic bullet for that. And $100,000 isn't going to change that. It may make a few dollars difference in people's lives, but it's not a huge difference. You know, I look at the Measure J money, and I kind of am sympathetic to the point of view that says that, you know, this Measure J wasn't sold as an opportunity to consolidate schools. And I'm pretty sure that everybody figured that they would get some money at their school. And so for all of those reasons, I need a really solid payback for closing anything. And honestly, I think if we're going to do that, then we need to consolidate down into 3 semi-large schools. I don't say large because I don't think this community is capable of producing a large school. Mm-hmm. And while I am sympathetic to the school of choice and that some people like a smaller school, you know, there are certain luxuries that we may not be able to afford. And that may be a luxury that we're not able to afford, to provide a minority of our parents with a very small personal school environment when the bulk of our students don't have that. It might not be fiscally responsible to do that. And our job is to be fiscally responsible. That being said, you leave all of the schools open, and that's the question is not done. It's delayed. Whether it's a parcel tax or it's a continued loss of enrollment, this cannot be the end of the conversation. And so if I were to fall on the side of leaving schools open, I would need a really solid comfort level that this renewed activity at the schools is not going to fall away when the threat is gone. Because, and I know this is going to sound a little bit rough, but you know, my question is, where was this last year, right? Where were these great ideas last year and the year before and the year before that? Mm-hmm. So if this district needs us to keep kicking them in the behind, we can do that, but that's not a really fun way to live. So I would need to know that embedded in this district would be, institutional enthusiasm for maintaining these efforts that we've been doing, like the uniqueness of our schools, like improved marketing, like all these things that we've been talking about. It cannot just be a conversation that came up because a particular school was threatened. So having said that, I tend to fall on the side of no closures because I'm just not seeing an ongoing significant increase that allows us to do anything that, in my mind, counterbalances the disruption of our students. But if we were, it would have to be something significant, and that's where I would consolidate into the 3 larger schools.
Linda?
Yes. All right, so now, looking down the road at the future and I've spent actually the last week talking to several different realtors and just asking them about the home market in Ojai, and you've all seen the newspaper with the potential for a moratorium, a moratorium on building because of the lack of water with our drought. I lived in Santa Barbara, I think I mentioned this before. When we had a severe drought in Santa Barbara, this was in the mid-70s, I had just finished a very large mural project at La Patera Elementary School in Goleta, and literally a month after I finished the project, the school closed because so many parents had moved away. They couldn't afford to live in Santa Barbara any longer. Of course, it's gotten that way again, but anyway, eventually they built a desalinization plant, which they never put online, and then they attached to state water. I know there's discussion about state water, but I think we're going to have an ongoing issue with water, which is going to limit the amount of building that's going to be happening in the Ojai Valley. I think the projections from the Delinker Group are overly optimistic. I really don't feel that we're going to be having increases in student population. The realtors are telling me that more and more of the homes are being sold and the families are moving away and going to places where it's much cheaper to live. And they're making a lot of money off their homes because people are moving here from Los Angeles. They're coming, retirees that are downsizing are coming here. And you've probably seen this in your neighborhood. It certainly is happening in my neighborhood. A lot of us who had our children go to the Ojai schools, we are still in our homes. I'm still in my home. My son is 42 now and has 2 children, and he can't afford to live in Ojai or Santa Barbara or Ventura because it's very expensive in all of those places. So I think, we just have to face the reality that our enrollment is going to be decreasing and costs for our teachers, expenses for our teachers are going to keep rising. We have this wonderful cadre of teachers who are going to be retiring. I would say in the next 5 years, we'll probably see a pretty significant number of our amazing teachers retire. That just happens. It's the reality of teaching of any job, actually. I feel that we need to close 2 schools, and I'm not talking about next year. I'm talking about in a couple of years. We can phase the closure. I feel we need to close Summit School first, and those kids can go to Topa Topa or San Antonio, whichever is their preference. And then that would be maybe in 2 years, and then another year after that, we would close San Antonio School. And perhaps by that time, we will have passed a parcel tax, or we will have been able to find someone who can develop the district property, and the district offices can then move into San Antonio and perhaps even move up to Summit. So we would be using those buildings for our district office activities. Obviously, if we rent out, if we develop our district office property, we need to have a place for the district office to go. All of the different kinds of things that the district office does take up space, and including needing space for maintenance of buses and all of the various offices. So that is my thought, even though it is not something that I would ever want to have happen. It's just the reality of our situation here and the fact that we do have incredibly limited resources. Our students and our funding are our resources, and they're becoming more and more limited. So that's my first choice. And I think I'm going to change so my first choice is closing those 2 schools, and then I think I'm going to change from keeping all 5 schools open to closing Summit would be my second choice. So just having that as my second choice. So that would give us 4 people are interested in keeping all schools open. 3 of us are interested in closing Summit, and 2 of us are interested in closing San Antonio and Summit. So it looks like there's actually 4 votes for Summit, and 4 for keeping all schools open.
So did you want to keep 3 things on there then?
It'd be 2. No, there'd be 2. Keeping all 5 schools open and closing Summit would be the other one.
So just, that was
These are potentials.
It was
right.
difficult, I know, for all 5 of you to articulate not only your first choice, but second and why. I thought you did an exemplary job. Just to sort of keep the calendar front and center, so the board members can think about this a little bit. If in fact you're comfortable reasonably soon before we leave tonight, having those 2 options be part of the next agenda, right? The next agenda is September 20th. And you could have an agenda item on that, an item on that agenda to make your decision about, remember, it's the tentative position, right? So that then, whatever the tentative position is, whether it's keeping all 5 schools open or closing Summit, keeping 4 open, whatever that tentative position is that you determine by the end of either next Tuesday night, or if you choose not to put it on next Tuesday night's agenda, we have other things to do, but the only real significant time that would be required to complete an agenda item would be our attorney coming, and I can limit his talk. Okay, we can make that shorter, so you'd have time to complete the decision on the tentative position of the board next Tuesday night, or if you choose not to do it next Tuesday night and you want to have a singular meeting only for that, then we would come back again a week from tonight, and the special meeting agenda would be only to make that decision. Obviously hear from people, right? There'll be public comment, I'm sure conversation, because that's the way you've done these meetings, which I applaud. So either of those 2 is open to you, but I don't see any problem, given how far you came tonight, to reach that decision at the latest a week from tonight. In which case then you could schedule the public meeting for, I've always thought, 2 weeks later. Okay.
I thought we had said it's definitely the 28th.
Well, no, what we said was if you made the decision tonight, that's going all the way back when we first set it up. If you made the decision
even last
tonight,
week.
well, you could. Yeah, look, I think it helps to have more time between the decision on the position of the board, which will be the subject of a public meeting, and the public meeting. Only because then you're giving people more time to know what happened and then come to the meeting. But it's not cast in stone. If you want to do it the next week, that's fine too.
And then our absolute final decision would be October 17th.
October 17th. So you still have,
right.
you'd have lots of time between the public hearing, whether it's on the 28th or October 5th, to then have the decision on the 17th. There's no one right answer. I'm just reminding everybody about the dates that we established back a month ago or so.
So I have a meeting in my calendar on the 21st. Was that the optional meeting?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Well, it was there when you look on our website. It was there for a couple of reasons. One was because we didn't know when you were going to be able to get to the point of having a tentative position solidified. It could have been for that purpose. It also could have been, and now we know more about how we're going to be looking at the budget, it also could have been a special meeting predominantly to talk about the budget, right? But after tonight and the work that Kevin and Jane and Andy did, And now that appears to be not only very complex, but something that might fit better past the decision of the board on the elementary schools. But that's why we set it on the 21st. We said every Wednesday for the 7th, right, through October 5th. And then one of those or two of those would be public hearings. And then the decision, obviously, regular meeting in October, which we set for the 17th, Monday.
I'd like to propose that we just add it to the regular meeting schedule on next Tuesday.
Do we have a second?
Well, I want to be clear, when you say add the vote?
The tentative
Between
vote.
the tentative vote between the two options.
Right.
I mean, I think realistically, based on what has happened here, people at Summit are going to want to be heard next week.
Mm-hmm.
So, from where I sit, I wonder if it's not better to start hearing from people at Summit before we take that vote. I mean,
It's still a tentative vote, though.
I realize, but it feels, it's sort of, I'd even rather make my tentative vote based on more information. It just seems odd. It almost seems, like we'll take a vote, it's tentative, then we'll hear from everybody, when we've already identified two options, one being everything stays open, the other being Summit closes, thus.
Yeah. That could still happen on the 20th, but if you think it's going to take too much time to put it all in one meeting, I'm fine with Wednesday. And it doesn't preclude the same thing happening. It's just.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering what the process will be. Are we gonna merely show up next week and then take a tentative vote and then start hearing from people?
Well, if you have, just think about the chronology. So one chronology is, just picking up on what you're saying, Kevin, and there's always merit to hearing before you make an important statement publicly. You could have, and I would always I would have it be the first item on the agenda next Tuesday. Well, it would be anyway because it's public comment, but you could just let people know that if you decide to have the board meeting when you're going to make the tentative position solidified on Wednesday, then you could hear from people on Tuesday, right? Think about what you heard and come back the next night and then determine your tentative position. So you could use both meetings. Tuesday night to hear from people, gather input, Wednesday night to make the decision on which of the two
And hear from more
positions.
people.
And hear from more people. Which of the two positions would be the one that would be publicized as the subject of the public hearing?
Before our final vote in October.
Right.
I guess I have a question. Is a tentative vote a legal thing, or could we have a public hearing on closing Summit without taking a tentative vote?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it
You
just-
could, you might not want to, it would be like the March 10th gathering at, at the Chaparral Auditorium. That was supposed to be a meeting of the 7-Eleven committee.
I just
Wonderfully co-opted by 200 people.
I'm just wondering if we might like the feel better of going through that process rather than taking a vote, which then we may or may not change later
The
on.
rule is that you do have to have a public hearing after the board has, they just keep it all a tentative position. So the board has to say, this is what our intent is, tentatively.
Okay, so there is a legal.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, but there's nothing that would stop you from having a well-publicized, come to talk with us, whether you call it a public hearing or an open session or a big part of a regular meeting. Nothing would preclude that, and then you make the decision tentatively, but then you still have to have another public hearing before you make a final vote.
What I would suggest would be that so we're having meetings Tuesday and Wednesday next week.
Correct.
I would suggest that on Tuesday, part of our agenda be to hear from people, also take further information from the administration, which presumably between now and Tuesday we'll be requesting from you guys, as well as on Wednesday to continue that process, and on Wednesday make the tentative vote. Then we've got the tentative vote, and then the next thing that happens, if it's necessary, is the public hearing that comes after the tentative vote. That way the tentative vote is as informed as possible. before it's made.
Yeah, there's a lot of appeal to that. And the other thing I would say then is an interesting question, and I've spoken with a number of you about this. If the board, in deciding, let's call it now Wednesday, if that's what happens, when you make the tentative decision on your position, right, which then would be the subject of the public hearing. Let's say you did that next Wednesday. If the position you adopt is to close no schools, okay, legally, technically, you don't have to have a public hearing. Okay, however, you might want to have a public hearing anyway, because there will be people who will want to come and tell you what a wonderful decision you made and not.
And not, to be sure.
Okay, so you're in a really good place right now, I think, and I think you just need to decide sort of in what order and what do you want to accomplish. But I have no doubt that you can reach that tentative position by the end of, certainly if you have 2 meetings next week, by the end of the meeting on the 21st. I have no doubt.
Well, the meeting on Tuesday, the 20th, is a business meeting, correct?
It is.
So is there a lot of business that's going to be
As I said,
covered?
no, the only, and we could even, if you wanted to, we could do this thing at another time. I've been working with our attorney on real estate, right? Because
Well,
there's
I
some-
would like to hear from the
Right.
the attorney.
And
I think.
he's great. I mean, you've heard, actually, he was here about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
Right? But the point is, I can tell him, it's like, you can do the New York Times version or the USA Today version, okay? So if we end up in sort of the USA Today version mode, he can get finished in the whole thing definitely in an hour, including questions and answers.
Mm-hmm.
He could also be there for the whole meeting. So, but if you want to put this item on the agenda, it should be first, not he, but this, so people who want to come to talk with you, not just, they can do it in a public comment anyway, but I would rather make it more overt, right? Put it on the agenda, say, this is what is the purpose of item number 5, not just public comments, but this is what it's about.
Mhm.
And then they don't want to stay in here, lawyer talk, then they can leave.
Okay. All right, so yes, I
Does that seem
think-
okay? Is that okay? Is that okay, Jane?
Yeah.
Mike, you okay with that?
Yeah, that sounds
Kevin, that was your idea, thing?
My only issue is let's have the lawyer come late so he's not on the clock.
He doesn't charge us by the hour on this one. This is a time and materials.
Susie Taylor would like to make another comment.
I just have a procedural question. So to make sure I understood correctly, you said if we were to reach a decision tonight, a tentative decision to have all 5 schools remain open, the board could reach that decision tonight, which appears to be where the majority of them are at this moment, and it would preclude having to have a public hearing and this issue would be resolved? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
everything is correct, except I think you got the time wrong. Right? The board is not going to reach that decision tonight because it wasn't on the agenda to be done tonight.
Okay.
Okay, so you can't, on a special meeting.
Even if it's tentative?
Even if it's tentative. I mean, but you certainly have a sense of the board, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so.
I'm just trying to rip the Band-Aid off as quickly as
Yeah,
possible
I hear,
to put everyone
I hear you, I hear you.
at ease. Okay, thank you.
But Susie, but the second point you were making, if the board decides to keep all 5 schools open in its tentative position, they are not required to have a public hearing on that position. But there's some wisdom that says you might want to do it.
Okay, so we have arrived at 2 tentative positions, and I'll repeat those. One of them, garnering 4 board members, is keeping all 5 schools open. The second one, garnering 4 board members' votes, is closing Summit School. So we have another public comment. And, all right. Carries, so you want to speak into the microphone, please?
Hello, my name is Karis Everett, and I was actually a student at Summit School from their preschool all the way up to their 6th grade. And I don't know a lot about the legal standing points of keeping it open, and I know that since it's such a small school and out of the area, it might be costing the board a lot of money to keep open, but it does raise a lot of owner of its fundraisers. My dad's up there and he cooks, and each time he goes there and makes food, he makes over $500, $800 for the school. The most I think he's made is about $2,000. For our CME cost, since we have such a small 6th grade class, we are able to pay for it through selling hot chocolate to the students. And if it would be possible to keep it open, I'm sure that there is plenty of fundraisers we can do, from doing our talent show, all the fundraisers we do to keep it open all goes to all the things we do. And since I got here a little bit later, I don't know what the main reason is. I'm guessing that it's probably costing the board a lot of money to keep open since it is a public school and not that many kids go there. I believe when I went there was 36 kids. Last year there was 46, and this year I believe there's around 32 to 40. And because it's, not Topa, it is it's such a small school. It's not pulling in a lot of money for the board, but it's also a type of thing where all the kids who live up there, I know there's kids who live in Fillmore and Santa Paula, and I ride the bus, and I guess this is another meeting, but I believe that something needs to be fixed because I get to school around 2:39, and the school starts at 2:40. I need to go into the band room and fix the instruments. So if Summit was shut down, a lot of kids would have to rely on the bus, which gets here, and sometimes it gets earlier and leaves earlier, and then kids have to drive in there, and parents have to drive in there who get to their jobs. So I believe that there should be a public hearing to discuss what could possibly happen in order to keep Summit School open, in my opinion.
Can I ask her a question?
I was going to say, where do you go to school now?
I go to Matilaha.
Matilaha.
Okay, excellent.
Do you take the bus to Matilaha?
Yes.
So what time do you get on the bus in the morning?
In the morning, I get on the bus at 6:50 every morning. It leaves at 6:50, so we must be there at about 6:45, or else you will leave without us.
Okay. And then it stops at San Antonio?
It stops in front of Bacali's to pick up kids. Well, it stops in this road after Besant. It goes all the way down. It goes to Bacali's. Then it goes to Thatcher. Then it goes to San Antonio. Makes a couple, I think about 4 other little stops, and then we get to Summit, or not Summit, Matilaha. But last year we got there with about 10 minutes to spare, and that was perfect, just in case I needed to pull stuff together. But this year we've been getting there with 1 minute, 30 seconds to spare, and a lot of kids have to put their instruments away in the band room and things like that.
Thank you.
Are my kids on it? Ella? Is Ella on there? Jem?
Ella.
Ruff?
Come on, you gotta know how your
And
kids
her
get to
sister
school.
Jem?
Jeez.
And her older brother, Jem?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
get
they're
on
on
the
there,
bus.
right?
Where's Asla? She was here before.
No, she is.
Really? Asla, how does Ella get to school? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments.
And I need to apologize. The reason we didn't take a tentative vote is because I wasn't planning to be here. I had a meeting out of town scheduled with somebody. She got pneumonia, so I'm here. So I'm happy to be here.
All right. So I would like a motion to approve our 2 tentative votes that we will.
Actually, just, you can't vote for exactly the reason you said.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but I get it.
Okay.
Okay, I think everybody here knows if it's okay with you, we're not taking a formal vote. I will construct the agenda item with Linda, for next Tuesday night, as we discussed, representing the sentiment of the board tonight without having it be a formal vote, but I think we know where you are.
Okay. So on that.
Same 5:30.
Here or at the board?
Here, 5:30 here. We're gonna stay here.
On that
Tuesday
note,
and Wednesday.
That one, we might actually get some more view.
our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.